Hi everyone, welcome to 1% Crime. I know you can't sleep, so I'll accompany you with crime stories that happened all over the world. Before we get to the story, tell me, where did you hear it from? And if you like this content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's jump straight into the story. The case of Nancy Paula Reyes Gorces, what led to the crime against the pregnant woman, and what became of the child. The quest for personal happiness and a better life can be long, fraught with difficulties, and doesn't always yield the desired outcome. Many people are drawn to other countries, or even the other side of the world in these pursuits. But sometimes, instead of finding the expected happiness, they encounter only pain, depression, deep disillusionment, or even death. In the pursuit of dreams and overarching goals, it is crucial to remain aware of the people around us. The story of a young Guatemalan woman named Nancy Paula Reyes Gorces has become one of the most resonant cases in Spain in recent years. The mother of two left Central America to cross the ocean in search of employment that could provide her daughters with a decent life and assist her elderly parents. However, the woman never returned home. Fragments of her disfigured and unrecognizable body were found with difficulty in desolate and nearly impassable areas. At the time of her crime, she was 4 months pregnant, and the perpetrator was someone Gorces had hoped to share her life with. Challenging life in Guatemala. Little is known about the early years of the woman named Nancy Paula Reyes Gorces. She was born on April 13, 1991, in a small village named Granados in the Republic of Guatemala. Nancy was the second of 5 children in a very poor family. Her parents, Jorge and Prudencia Gorces, struggled to make ends meet. Despite this, they did everything possible to ensure their children received a good education and could live better than they did. After finishing school, Nancy was able to enroll at the university in the city of Villanueva, where she studied business administration and document management. She was a diligent student and graduated with honors. However, despite her academic achievements, significant career prospects did not follow. She worked as a cashier in a large supermarket during her studies, and later was promoted to administrator, but her career progression stalled there. During her university years, Nancy lived in an unregistered marriage with a young man, whose name is not mentioned in public records, with whom she had 2 daughters. Unfortunately, this relationship did not lead to a long-term commitment, and the couple separated. The father of the girls subsequently lost interest in the fate of his children, and did not provide any financial support. Nancy continued to live in her parents' house, now with her own daughters, working at the supermarket and seeing no future prospects. The family barely had enough money for essentials, and something had to change. In 2013, Nancy's older sister emigrated to the United States, where she soon found a good job, married successfully, and settled well. Inspired by her sister, Nancy decided to radically change her life too, but she chose to relocate to Europe, settling on sunny Spain. At that time, she didn't even have enough money to buy a one-way plane ticket, let alone funds needed for initial expenses. For several years, Gorces worked diligently, saving enough money to finally make her dream come true in the summer of 2018. In July, she bought a ticket to Madrid and promised her parents that she would keep in constant contact so they wouldn't worry about her. She planned to find housing and a job upon arrival. She carried a few €1,000, enough to rent a room, cover food, and the most necessary items until she could secure a steady income. At the time of her departure, Nancy was 27 years old, and her daughters, who stayed with their grandparents in Guatemala, were 7 and 5 years old. Nancy didn't stay long in Madrid. After living in Barcelona for some time, she moved to the city of Ciudad Real, the center of the Spanish province of the same name. She called home almost daily, asking about her family's well-being, and she regularly sent money home, which increasingly helped her parents not only fully support themselves and her daughters, but also to renovate their old house. Nancy mentioned she didn't have an official stable job and was making ends meet through odd jobs, like cleaning in affluent homes or caring for the elderly and sick. Nancy never complained about the hardships. On the contrary, she told her family that Europe offered more opportunities, and she could never have earned as much back home, even working around the clock with no days off. It seemed she was completely satisfied with how her life was unfolding, and even spoke of eventually bringing her daughters to Spain once she saved enough to rent a spacious and comfortable home for the whole family. A fateful romance. For a while, Nancy didn't share much about her personal life, claiming she simply had no time due to work. But in the spring of 2020, she admitted to her parents that she had met a man with whom she had started a romantic relationship. His name was Carlos Andres Bustamante, and they had met by chance while Gorsuch was looking for new rental housing. As they resolved this issue, the couple grew closer and eventually started living together. Carlos was a year older than his beloved and, at the start of their relationship, did not have a steady income, surviving on random small jobs. In fact, Nancy was the main breadwinner in their relationship. She paid for housing and bills, and often gave Carlos money for his personal needs and expenses. However, she never complained to her family about this, so her parents were confident that everything was fine, and their daughter had met a good man with whom she lived in love, harmony, and abundance. By that time, Nancy's two younger brothers had also moved to Spain, with whom she kept in touch. She was particularly close to Dennis, the youngest brother, who had even met Carlos personally and found him likable. At the end of June 2020, Nancy and Carlos decided to move to the resort city of Santander, located on the Atlantic coast. In a phone conversation with her family, Nancy mentioned that the climate was warmer and better there, and she saw more job prospects. However, at that time, certain difficulties began to appear in her relationship with Carlos, which he tried not to discuss with anyone. Bustamante turned out to be jealous, temperamental, and quite cruel. Moreover, he lacked any career ambitions and was completely satisfied being supported by a woman. Most alarmingly, he abused alcohol and occasionally indulged in forbidden substances, although he constantly tearfully promised to quit and find a stable job. Gorsuch was openly doubting whether to continue her life with this man when she discovered she was pregnant. Carlos was thrilled by this news and swore that from now on, their life would change for the better, but in reality, things only got worse. He continued to drink and use drugs, taking money from his civil wife or asking his mother for it. Moreover, he began to physically abuse Nancy, something she tried to keep from everyone. Alarming signals. On the evening of August 12th, while Nancy was video chatting with her parents, they suddenly heard Carlos loudly shouting and berating their daughter, demanding to know who she was talking to. He didn't believe her when she said she was speaking with her mother and snatched the phone from her hands. After verifying the truth by looking at the screen, he simply threw the device onto a chair and walked away. The next day, the situation repeated itself. Carlos again grabbed the phone from Nancy's hands while she was talking to her parents and daughters. He demanded to see who she was speaking with, insulted her, and even threatened harm. A frightened Nancy later explained to her relatives that her partner was just overly jealous and tried to reassure them that everything was fine. Her parents, however, tried to persuade her to contact the police, but she insisted that she could handle the situation herself. However, on August 17th, during a candid phone conversation with her sister, Gorsuch ominously stated that if anything happened to her or if she suddenly died, Carlos would be solely to blame. Her words were chilling, but she did not elaborate further, only asking her sister to take care of her children if needed. This was the last time her sister heard Nancy's voice, mysterious disappearance of the pregnant woman. On August 20th, around 2 in the afternoon, Nancy sent a text message to her father, promising to call later that evening, but she never did, nor the next day, which was unusual for her. She also did not respond to calls from her family, prompting them to try contacting Carlos, but he did not answer his phone either. Since the couple had recently moved to Santander and had no friends there, and Nancy's brothers were on the other side of the country and couldn't quickly arrive to check on her, the situation was alarming. A few days later, a strange message came from Carlos's phone stating that he and Nancy had argued and decided to split up. Allegedly, she had packed her things and left in search of a separate apartment, was ignoring his calls, and he had no idea where she might be. Her brothers then suggested that Carlos should immediately come to Ciudad Real, so they could go to the police together and file a missing person report. Carlos readily agreed, but as expected, he never showed up, did not file the report, and on top of everything else, he too stopped communicating with the Gorsuch family. Mother knew everything. The relatives of the missing woman themselves contacted the police to report her disappearance. Meanwhile, through Nancy's friends, her brothers found the address of Sandra Bustamante, Carlos's mother. When they visited her, introduced themselves, and explained the situation, she unexpectedly broke down in tears, confessing that she had suspected her son could do something terrible to his partner, but she did not elaborate on the details. Sandra also had no idea where her son and future daughter-in-law were. Carlos wasn't answering her calls, but only sent brief messages asking her not to ask questions and to give him some time. She liked Nancy, but knew her son too well and understood what he was capable of. The next day, Sandra was called in for questioning at the police station. Law enforcement wanted to discuss the disappearance of her would-be daughter-in-law and to find out the possible whereabouts of Carlos. She shared with the officers what she had already told the girls' brothers the day before and showed them a lengthy text message that Nancy had sent her a couple of days before she vanished. In the message, Nancy pleaded with Sandra never to give her son money, regardless of the tearful stories he might concoct. According to Gorsees, he would spend it all on alcohol and banned substances, under the influence of which he became very aggressive and cruel. He had no desire to find a job or battle his addictions, and his behavior became increasingly threatening, prompting the pregnant woman to consider leaving him. She ended her message by saying it was better to end things now, before anyone got hurt. Another disturbing detail also came to light. It turned out that Carlos had several prior convictions for causing bodily harm, and one of his first victims had been his own mother, whom he had brutally beaten when he was just a 17-year-old teenager. At that time, he had gotten off with probation, but later, after leaving his family home, he had served short terms for assaulting women with whom he lived and tried to form relationships. The oldest profession. The investigation was just beginning, but in the first few days, many curious details emerged that indicated this union was doomed from the start. In addition to Carlos being an aggressive, unemployed drug addict with a criminal record and suffering from uncontrollable bouts of rage, friends of Nancy revealed something interesting about her as well. It turned out that the woman was not merely a housekeeper or caregiver, as she had told her parents, because cleaning houses and caring for the elderly would never have brought in as much money as she was sending home every month. The slender, dark-haired Guatemalan with a striking appearance provided escort services to wealthy Spaniards and visitors alike. Indeed, her work was connected to the odd and sudden move to the resort port city of Santander, where she had more opportunities to earn. Carlos knew about his beloved's occupation, and initially, he was fine with it since she fully supported them both, eliminating the need for him to find work himself. However, when she became pregnant, he began to lose his mind. Firstly, he was tormented by doubts about whether he was the father of the child, suspecting it might be one of Nancy's clients. Secondly, she continued to work even in her condition, and Bustamante was insanely jealous. He alternated between forbidding her to meet and talk with other men and forcing her to work when they ran out of money to live on. The money that the man took from his mother he spent exclusively on himself and his vices. Horrific discoveries in a rented apartment. For nearly a week, there had been no known whereabouts of Nancy and Carlos. Carlos had been in touch, but only responded with messages and never disclosed his location. Surprisingly, it wasn't until August 26th that police finally obtained a warrant to search the couple's vacant rental apartment in Santander. What they found there was truly shocking, and left no doubt that Nancy was no longer alive. Blood traces were found virtually everywhere in the apartment. Some attempts had been made to clean them up, but for the most part, they were visible even to the naked eye. In the clogged drains of the bathroom and toilet, fragments of bones, hair, as well as pieces of skin and internal organs were discovered. Forensic analysis confirmed that all belonged to the missing woman, although her remains were not found in the apartment. The crime scene suggested that Nancy had been brutally ended, dismembered in the bathroom, and her remains disposed of elsewhere. Carlos immediately became the prime suspect in the case. He remained unreachable, and his whereabouts were unknown. Also found in the apartment was a package from a small hatchet purchased at a local hardware store. The tool itself was not found, but Carlos Bustamante's clear fingerprints were on the package. Security footage from that store showed that on August 20th, Carlos bought the hatchet, a pair of sturdy rubber gloves, and large trash bags. At a market near their home, he purchased a small cart from an elderly vendor who immediately recognized the suspect from a photo shown to him. Arrest and search for the body. The day after the grim discoveries in the apartment, an unsuspecting Carlos unexpectedly turned himself in at a police station in Madrid. Trying to deflect suspicion from himself, he went to report Nancy missing, but was immediately arrested as the main suspect in the gruesome crime. Carlos claimed he had nothing to do with what happened, stating they had argued and parted ways on August 20th. He said he left town in a fit of emotion and was unaware of any subsequent events involving Nancy. He suggested that someone might have attacked her when she returned to the apartment to gather her belongings. Carlos' version sounded far-fetched, especially after police found his fingerprints on the hatchet's packaging. In the following days, nearby wastelands, sewer systems, and the coastline were thoroughly searched with the help of divers, but no trace of Nancy was found. The police then decided to track all of Carlos' movements from August 20th to the 26th using his mobile phone signals. It turned out he had spent 3 days traveling along the coast, and had also visited the cities of Bilbao and Burgos before heading to Madrid. It was clear that Carlos was trying to cover his tracks, but it seemed unlikely that he would travel around the country with a dismembered body, leading authorities to continue their search in Santander. Street surveillance footage showed that on the evening of August 20th, he walked toward a large natural forest park. He returned to the apartment late at night, and then went out again, this time with a cart filled with oddly shaped bags. There were few cameras in the park itself, so once Carlos entered the wooded area, he disappeared and later reappeared with the same cart, which was now much lighter. He then headed toward the railway tracks, beyond which was a steep cliff overgrown with bushes. From there, he returned much lighter, giving law enforcement a clear indication of where to look for the body. Where is the child? It wasn't until September 16th that bags containing highly decomposed human remains were found in thick underbrush on the hillside. These remains were identified as those of the missing Nancy Gorses, divided into 20 parts with a hatchet. According to security camera footage, everything Carlos transported in the cart was recovered, but something was still missing. Nancy, as we recall, was 4 months pregnant, yet her fetus was not found in any of the bags. The condition of the victim's genitals and lower abdomen showed merciless mutilation with a knife and hatchet, indicating that the perpetrator likely extracted the fetus and disposed of it separately from the mother's body. Carlos consistently denied his involvement, gave conflicting statements, and continued to try to shift the blame onto an unknown assailant. However, traces of the victim's blood were found on his clothing and shoes, which he attempted but failed to completely wash off. Despite Bustamante's refusal to admit guilt, investigators were able to piece together the chain of tragic events and the full scenario of the crime. Forensic experts believe that on the afternoon of August 20th, following an argument, the man brutally beat and strangled his pregnant partner in the kitchen, where traces of blood were found on the floor and walls. Carlos then moved Nancy's body to the bathroom and went shopping at a hardware store and the market. In the bathroom, he divided Nancy's body into 20 parts using a hatchet and a large kitchen knife, placed the pieces into bags, and loaded everything into a cart. He then went to the park, looking for secluded places to dispose of the body. Late at night, he left the apartment with the cart and followed a pre-planned route deep into the park, scattering the bags in various locations, hoping they would never be found. Trial and sentence: the whereabouts of the fetus Carlos removed from Nancy's body remain unknown. He denied his guilt and claimed he loved her. From the time of the gruesome crime until his arrest in Madrid, Bustamante lived off the money he stole from Gorses, which he spent daily in bars across various cities. The investigation, the search for evidence and witnesses took law enforcement nearly 2 years, and the trial of the murderer did not begin until July 2022. In November of the same year, Carlos was found guilty of the premeditated brutal murder of Nancy and her unborn child, as well as the dismemberment and desecration of her body. However, many considered the sentence handed down to the murderer to be too lenient. Bustamante was sentenced to 25.5 years in prison, and he was also ordered to pay financial compensation of 150,000 euros to the parents and daughters of the deceased woman. Today our story repeats the biblical story of the first crime on earth. As the book of Genesis states, and Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. This occurred after Cain had sacrificed to the Almighty the fruits of the earth and Abel the firstborn lambs. To the disappointment of the older man, God accepted the younger man's sacrifice and rejected his gifts. Driven by selfish jealousy, Cain called Abel to the field and there took his life. But unfortunately, even in the modern world, because of unhealthy jealousy, the older brother can kill the younger one. The end of June 2010 was very difficult for the family of Donna and Samuel Eckerd. Their 19-year-old son Sean was missing. The night before, Sean had a fight with his older brother Stanley and left the house slamming the door. Sean had never previously allowed himself to leave the house for long periods of time without his phone or informing his mother. Late that night, the whole family was alarmed by the young man's disappearance. But officially the search for the boy began only 24 hours later. Missing person notices with photos of smiling, blonde-haired Sean were posted at all stations, in supermarkets, and along the streets. But even after 2 days of searching, there were no results. The police had their hands up in the air as they continued their search. For more than 2 days, Sean Paul Eckerd was officially missing. Relatives, acquaintances, and a few friends gathered a team of activists who day and night combed local establishments, interviewed random passers-by, and minute by minute reconstructed the route of the guy that night. The police, without stopping the search, began to look more closely into the habits and rhythm of the Eckerd family to reconstruct the sequence of events leading up to Sean's disappearance. Donna and Samuel Eckerd married with a history of family relationships. They had 6 adult children from previous marriages. After experiencing difficulties and setbacks in their early unions, they found their safe haven in each other's company and settled in San Diego, California. They rented a large, good-sized family home and attended the local church on weekends without fail. The family was devout and lived a quiet and unsociable lifestyle. A few years after the family moved in, they had a son, Stanley, and 2 years later, a second son, Sean. Donna devoted herself fully to the home and raising her sons, so the brothers grew up in love and care. They both attended a good local school, and on weekends, without fail, the whole family participated in church activities. The eldest children, having reached adulthood, flew away from their parents' nest all over the continent to start their own families. But the Eckerd family was friendly. They kept in touch with each other, regularly called each other, and spent all family holidays together. Sean was a simple and fun-loving boy. He had a bright appearance, charisma, and insight that attracted people to him like a magnet. He knew how to listen and empathize, so he made friends very easily. Stanley, on the contrary, had a more reserved character and was wary of everything new. He was shy, so socializing with people was much more difficult for him than for his brother. They had one common group of friends and classmates, despite the age difference. Together, the brothers were like one, helping each other and always looking out for each other. The boys grew up well-mannered and studied very well. They always had a trusting and friendly relationship with each other. Small jokes about each other were accepted with humor by their parents. Respect was valued above all else in the family. Donna and Samuel raised their children from childhood with faith in God and according to God's laws. The life of the Eckerd family flowed in its own way. As the brothers grew up, their interests unnoticeably became completely opposite. The youngest, Sean, played in the music band, and the eldest, Stanley, became interested in martial arts. The life of each young boy was filled with vivid impressions and emotions which they shared with the family in the evenings. Sean was always first. His stories about music, friends, and upcoming plans took up most of the evening time when the family gathered before dinner and shared the emotions of the day. Everyone listened to Sean. There was no time for Stanley, nor, it seemed to him, was there much to share. No grandiose plans for the future, no exciting stories, not even stories of friends to draw attention to. So Stanley humbly listened to his brother's stories. On one such evening, Sean told his family that he had met a neighbor girl, Mary Jane. A fragile young girl with bright brown eyes and long blonde hair put Sean in a daze. Through the open window of the house where the girl lived, he heard a magical piano playing. As if mesmerized, he went to the captivating sounds of music and entered the house without knocking. Self-confidence in his own charm allowed Sean to get out of such a funny situation with dignity, and cleverly met the girl he liked. She was a few years older than Sean, but this did not prevent them from maintaining a friendly relationship. The soul of the company, Sean often organized picnics where Mary Jane was invited. They walked a lot, visited parks and observation decks. The budding adolescent love affair was interrupted by the unfair reality of the adult world. The Eckerd family received the sad news of the illness of Dama's elderly mother, Sean and Stanley's grandmother. In search of prosperity, parents tried to take into account the interests of each member of the family, but the decision made fundamentally changes the life of the whole family. Sean did not want to leave his native land, his friends, and his Mary Jane, but the parents' decision had already been made. The Eckards leave the city where their children were born and raised and move to another state. So in 2005, as fate would have it, the Eckerd family settles in the house of Dama's mother in the small town of Spring Hill in Florida, where they begin a new life. The move was like a breath of fresh air for the whole family, because the decision was the right one. Sean and Stanley's grandmother was on the mend. Sean's heart was broken. He missed his band, in which he played, his walks with Mary Jane and hangouts in his favorite city. But it is impossible for life-loving Sean to be sad for long, and after a while, a new life becomes as full as the one he missed. Donna and Samuel safely got a job at the Presbyterian Church, where they were almost all their time. Donna took care of the children in the nursery, and Samuel helped with the chapel. Over the course of time, the brothers grow close again and make new acquaintances together again at school. Old life seems to be resurrected in a new place. Sean plays in the school band again. Stanley attends a martial arts school that is only a couple blocks from their new home. Despite this new busy life, Sean can't stop thinking about Mary Jane. Every night after class, he locks himself in his room and they talk on the phone for hours. The goodbyes end the same way, with Sean saying he dreams of meeting again. Each time he promises that, after getting his parents' permission, he will definitely come to see her. Whereas the younger brother grew and kept his first love in his heart, the elder Stanley tried to establish himself and the family in his own way. Quiet and calm Stanley, by virtue of his stiffness and modesty, seemed to be deprived of parental warmth and attention. In pursuit of self-expression, he makes a series of bad decisions that will have dire consequences for the entire family. In May 2006, he informs his parents that he intends to drop out of school and devote his life to studying martial arts and creating a martial arts club. But youthful maximalism leads the guy into a bad company, where he begins to engage in petty fraud and try illegal drugs. In 2007, dysfunctional connections eventually led Stanley to arrest. He was caught stealing and charged with felony fraud-related offenses. The news of the elder son's shenanigans deals the first heavy blow to Donna. She ends up in the hospital with a heart attack, but the situation is quickly resolved with the help of a lawyer hired by Jennifer's sister. He skillfully defends Stanley, proving the lack of direct evidence, which allows the guy to quickly go free, receiving only a suspended sentence. This episode greatly frightens Stanley. He feels guilty and closes himself off in the hope of being understood and accepted by his family. Having survived the frightening events that happened to Stanley, Sean does not say anything to his parents about his decisions. During his summer vacation, he takes a job as a waiter. Having saved up some money, he leaves only a note for his mother to go to California to marry Jane. The long, 2-day bus ride to his beloved seemed like an eternity. The scenery changed outside the window, the day changed to night, and Sean imagined how at the final station he would see her, his Mary Jane. The driver announced the final stop, and the bus stopped. Sean was ready to run to her, for he had already seen her happy face through the window and her long hair, which she was tucking behind her ears with her fingers. They had spent some of their happiest days together. They'd had picnics, just like they'd had in his best high school days. Sean had confessed his love to Mary for the first time, and it was mutual. After another walk, the young people sat down on a bench. Sean felt faint. His eyes went black. He fell unconscious. Sean ended up in the hospital. The young boy was fading away like a match in a matter of days. Mary Jane contacted Sean's sister. Jennifer urgently flew to California. Doctors diagnosed the cause of such a rapid fading of a strong and sturdy guy. Tick-borne encephalitis begins suddenly and very quickly causes complications of various kinds, up to inflammation of the brain. A difficult struggle for Sean's life and health began. Doctors fought for the boy's life for a long time. More than a month of coma and 6 months of rehabilitation helped him to return from the other side of the world. Sean had a very hard time recovering for a long time. An ordinary tick bite on a summer walk turned out to be a serious injury for him. Jennifer took her brother back to Florida, where he faced therapy and a long recovery. Mary Jane was left to wait. Again, the only source of communication for the lovers was the telephone. A series of troubles and unexpected illnesses brought the Eckerd family together. Donna does everything impossible to completely rid her beloved son Sean from the consequences of a serious illness. She carefully monitors his diet and exercise. Such attentive care leads to a full recovery of Sean and to Stanley's inner resentment and jealousy, which he nurtures in bits and pieces. After a while, Sean regained his strength and returned to his studies in music. In 2009, he finishes his studies and dreams of going to his Mary Jane to return together and introduce her to his parents as his favorite. But Sean's plans are not destined to come true. Stanley introduces his brother to his dream girl, Samantha Rowe. Samantha, a native of Florida, quickly found a common language with the two brothers. Stanley was in love and sympathized with her, but the girl was impressed by the cheerful and sociable Sean. For some time, Stanley actively courts Samantha, and she accepts his signs of attention. Several romantic meetings end with a passionate kiss. Stanley is immensely happy, but Samantha, who said yes to her older brother, is still thinking about her younger brother. Samantha decides to write a message to Sean in which she confesses her sympathy for him and invites him for a walk around the city. The guy agrees, and they spend the evening walking along the waterfront and talking about Stanley and Mary Jane. Sean does not seek to win the girl, after all. He has long belonged to another. A rejected Samantha writes a message to Stanley and tells him that Sean has been seeing her and confesses that he really likes her too. Stanley was furious. That same evening, he went up to his brother's room, where they had a conversation. At first the brothers talked quietly, then their words turned into shouts, and then there was dead silence. The parents were at home, but the brothers sometimes clarified relations quite loudly, so they did not see anything special in what had happened. Mom was the first to realize Sean was missing. He hadn't returned her calls. Recalling the evening before, she got Stanley's explanation that Sean had left home after an argument. After 2 days of searching, the police received a frightening call. The caller was Sean's sister, Jennifer. The dispatcher who took the call heard only a woman's scream in the receiver. A piercing male moan could be heard in the background. After repeated requests to calm down, the dispatcher finally records the request for help. Jennifer continues to scream. She pleads for help and reports, "Oh damn it, my brother Stanley killed Sean. He's in the house talking to his mother. His father is freaking lying over his dead son, who's been buried in the ground since early Saturday morning. Damn it, I'm begging for help." Police officers arriving at the scene of the tragedy observed a horrifying scene. In the backyard of the house, Samuel was kneeling on his knees, 2 hands dripping earth. He was pulling his son's body out of the damp earth, screaming and trying to wipe the earth off Sean. In an instant, a quiet neighborhood filled with sculpted lawns, where the 2 young brothers often waved to neighbors, turned into the scene of a violent tragedy. And now the Eckerd family, who once raised 2 sons, are left with the horrifying memory of digging in the ground only to find one of their sons and watching the other son being handcuffed and taken away. Stanley Eckerd was detained on suspicion of premeditated murder. At his first interrogation, he revealed that he had no intention of killing his brother. In a moment of anger, he struck Sean on the head. The resulting injury caused Sean to fall. Stanley checked his pulse. Realizing that his younger brother was dead, he tied up the body and carried it out the window to bury it on the lawn behind the house. Stanley's words at the inquest, "I buried him." After all, that's what you do with dead people. These words sound like the cold-blooded calculation of a serial killer, not a loving brother. In his defense, Stanley Eckerd said he did it for his mother. He wanted to protect her from the shocks she might have received at the news. Afterward, Stanley planned to move his brother's body to rebury it once his parents were gone. Stanley's behavior during the interrogation varied. He cried and confessed what he had done and was obviously sorry, presenting it as an accident, or he blamed Sean with hatred in his eyes. Stanley spoke very harshly and unpleasantly about his younger brother. He called him guilty for all his troubles and admitted that he had won the rivalry for his mother's and Samantha's love. That same day, Stanley was charged with second-degree murder and taken into custody without bail. 2 days later, Dr. Barbara Wolf performed an autopsy on Sean's body. She presented to the court the results of the forensic examination, which indicated that the victim's neck showed bruising under the skin and rope marks were present, indicating that the neck had been compressed to make breathing difficult. The examination concluded that the death was the result of an inflicted head injury and asphyxiation. Assistant State Attorney Pete Magrino proceeded to scrutinize the case. On February 25, 2011, the first hearing began, presided over by District Judge Stephen Rushing. On the second row were Stanley's parents, Donna and Samuel Eckerd. They wept as they watched their oldest son being led into the courtroom under escort. On April 9, 2013, the trial began in Hernado Court, presided over by District Judge Anthony Toddy. The defense was led by Attorney Alan Hunter, while Prosecutor Pete remained on the prosecution side. The main goal of the prosecution was to convince the jury that Stanley had carefully planned the crime. Defense Attorney Allen stated that there was a spontaneous fight that led to the tragic outcome. In closing, Allen appealed to the jury to take note of Stanley's attempt to cover up the crime in the name of good intentions. Stanley Eckerd was charged with first-degree premeditated murder and faced a mandatory life sentence if convicted of that charge. Sentencing was scheduled for May 13th. Stanley's fate was in the hands of District Judge Anthony Toddy, who presided over the 5-day trial. Second-degree murder is punishable by up to life in prison. Stanley Elias Eckerd always said he never intended to kill his brother 3 years ago, before burying him in the front yard of the house. Before trial, Eckert rejected an offer from prosecutors to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for limiting his prison sentence to 20 years. Eckert remained stone-faced as the clerk read the verdict. The brothers' parents, Samuel and Donna, wept quietly. As the jury left the courtroom, Samuel Eckert's sobs turned to screams, and numerous relatives gathered around Donna and Samuel. The jury agreed that Eckert did not plan to kill 19-year-old Sean, but the jury did not completely absolve him of guilt. After deliberating for about 2.5 hours, 9 women and 3 men found Eckert guilty of second-degree murder. All the while, the Eckerts said they believed Stanley's account of what happened in the early morning hours of June 19, 2010, and criticized the state attorney's office for filing the charges. Later Friday, Samuel Eckert said Chief Assistant Public Defender Alan Lanter did an excellent job. The family questioned the appropriateness of the sentence. They filed an appeal to appeal the verdict, but were denied. I really can't understand how the jury reached a verdict of second-degree murder in about 2 hours, Samuel Eckert said. Despite that, our faith was not shaken, he said. One fact was not disputed during the trial. After his brother's death, Stanley pulled his body out of Sean's bedroom window and buried it in a shallow grave in the backyard of the family's Spring Hill home. Samuel Eckert found Sean's body 2 days later. Assistant State's Attorney Pete Magrino began his closing arguments at trial by showing jurors photos of Sean's dirt-covered body lying in a fetal position in the hole. This is not a detective novel case, Magrino said. He noted that Stanley, when questioned by detectives on the day his brother's body was found, changed his testimony as many as 6 times, saying he initially knew nothing about Sean's death. For 2 days after his brother's funeral, according to Magrino, Stanley sent messages from Sean's cell phone to family members, saying that Sean had allegedly gone to California to stay with his girlfriend Mary Jane. Also on behalf of Sean, he corresponded with Samantha, saying that he did not want to communicate and she should pay attention to Stanley. After hours of questioning, Stanley said that Sean had died during a struggle in the bedroom that morning. He claimed he heard a snap in his brother's neck as they fell to the floor. He then hid Sean's body to protect his mother, Donna, who has a weak heart. He said he planned to tell his father after his mother left on a trip. Those injuries that the defendant inflicted with his hands constitute murder, Magrino said, and he also called attention to testimony and Stanley's statements to detectives about rising tensions over Samantha Rowe. He also called attention to testimony about a conversation Stanley had with his brother and a friend about revenge in the weeks before Sean's death. In that conversation, the friend testified, Stanley said that if he was going to kill someone, he would hit the person in the back of the head and bury the body in the yard. That evidence was tenuous at best and could not dispel reasonable doubt, Alan Lanter told the jury. A crime involves an act with an intended result, Lanter said. Yes, he was involved in his brother's death, but he didn't kill his brother. Lanter pointed to testimony from a forensic pathologist who said the blow to the head, combined with other factors, Sean's high blood alcohol content and possible lingering brain swelling due to encephalitis, likely led to his death. The pathologist also testified that hitting his head on the bedroom nightstand when the 2 men fell could have been enough to kill Sean. Lanter reminded the jury of the testimony of Donna Eckert, who said that Sean suffered from severe mood swings after suffering from encephalitis. At one point in her testimony, Donna Eckert called Sean's death an accident. The jury also could have found Stanley Eckert guilty of third-degree murder or manslaughter. Calling the case a pardonable homicide, Lanter asked jurors not to let gruesome photos of Sean's body and Stanley's poor decision to bury him in the yard distract them from what led to his death. Stanley Eckert did something horrible after Sean died, said Lanter, but he's not a murderer. During the final sentencing, excitement gripped the Eckert parents. Judge Anthony imposed a sentence of 50 years in prison without parole. The parents were broken. One miserable day had taken 2 sons from them at once. The cold-blooded murder of an innocent man, and even a brother, is clearly beyond the bounds of adequate human response. In the biblical story, the brother-killer Cain was banished from paradise as punishment. But he solved the problem differently, eliminating the source of his remorse. Have you ever heard the saying that hesitation is akin to death? In our story today, this takes on a literal meaning as the negligent delay by police officers cost the lives of 2 young people. During the subsequent legal proceedings, it was repeatedly stated that the officers followed protocol and waited 24 hours from the time of the missing persons report. However, it was during these critical hours that the couple endured a tragic end under extreme cruelty. The case of Shaman Christian and Christopher Newsom is cited as one of the most notorious and brutal in the history of the United States. It shook the nation twice, first in 2007 when the crimes occurred, and later in 2011 when the sentences handed down to the gang members were challenged and appealed. This complicated legal battle led to the enactment of two laws. These laws restrict attorneys and defendants from casting the victims in a negative light and abolish the requirement for a jury's unanimous verdict to be approved by a judge. In this harrowing tale, there were 2 innocent victims and 5 merciless criminals, with the motive for the heinous act being a simple robbery. Let's delve into the details of this tragedy, piece together the chronology of those horrific events, understand the role of each participant, and explore whether this tragedy could have been avoided and the young lives saved. Who were Shaman Christian and Christopher Newsom? Hugh Christopher Newsom Jr., commonly known as Chris, was born on September 21, 1983 in Knoxville, Tennessee, to Mary and Hugh Newsom, in a loving, large family. As the youngest child, he was adored by his family. Chris was athletic in his youth, particularly excelling in baseball during his school years. His coach believed he had a bright future in the sport, but a severe injury and a prolonged recovery process ended his promising athletic career. Nevertheless, Chris was a man of many talents. He was an excellent artist, played guitar, had woodworking skills, and was knowledgeable about cars and motorcycles. Dreaming of becoming a mechanic in his youth, Chris's passion for carpentry eventually took precedence. After high school, he attended the prestigious University of Tennessee, where he was a diligent student and ranked among the top of his class. Shaman Gail Christian was born on April 29, 1985 in the Cogdokes, Texas, the younger of 2 children to Dina and Gary Christian. She was raised alongside her older brother Chase, with whom she shared a close and affectionate bond. Notably, Dina had been diagnosed with infertility in her youth, and the birth of her 2 children was considered nothing short of miraculous. In 1997, the Christian family moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, where the children attended local schools, and the parents established a small but profitable family business. Dina conducted individual psychotherapy sessions at home. Shannon, sharing her mother's interest in psychology, was outgoing and kind-hearted. After high school, she pursued a degree in sociology at the University of Tennessee and worked part-time to save for her dream of buying a car. Her parents and brother helped her realize this dream on her 21st birthday, contributing towards the purchase of a silver Toyota 4Runner. It was on the university campus in 2006 that Christopher and Shannon met through mutual friends. She was just 21, and he was about to turn 23. It was love at first sight, and the couple became inseparable. Within a month, Chris introduced Shannon to his parents, expressing his desire to spend his future with her. Shannon reciprocated by introducing Chris to her family, who warmly welcomed him. In October 2006, a significant family dinner was held, attended by both their parents and siblings. Discussions revolved around the young couple's deep feelings and their plans to marry after graduating from university. Everyone was happy and full of hope for the future, blissfully unaware of the tragedy that would soon befall their families. Vanished on the way to a party, on January 6, 2007, Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom were invited to a birthday party of a mutual friend. That Saturday, Shannon visited a beauty salon to prepare for the celebration, parking her car in a nearby underground garage where they planned to meet. However, Chris was delayed, leading to a slight argument between them as they were running late for the event. Their friends became increasingly worried when Shannon and Chris did not show up at the party. Known for their responsibility, it was unlike them to miss an event without notifying anyone. Attempts to reach them on their phones were unsuccessful. In desperation, Shannon's best friend repeatedly called her mother late into the night to check if everything was all right, but received no answer. The next morning, Dina, Shannon's mother, realized that her daughter had not come home. Initially, she was not overly concerned, assuming Shannon might have stayed over at Chris' place after the party. Besides, Shannon had a work shift on Sunday, so it was plausible she went straight to work from Chris' place. However, Dina's concern grew when she noticed several missed calls from an unknown number around midnight. Returning the call, she heard Shannon's friend's voice, informing her that Shannon and Chris had not shown up at the birthday party and were unreachable. This instilled fear in Dina, sensing that something terrible might have happened to her daughter and her boyfriend. Neither Shannon nor Chris was answering their phones, and Chris' parents were equally surprised, believing he was staying at Shannon's place. Further anxiety arose when it was discovered Shannon had not shown up for work either. The worried parents immediately contacted the police, but the response was lackluster. The officers suggested the couple might have simply sought some alone time and lost track of it. They also followed the protocol that an adult is considered missing only after 24 hours without contact. But for Shannon and Chris, those 24 hours were critical. Not willing to wait, the parents and friends of the young couple began their own search. They contacted everyone they knew, visited hospitals, distributed flyers with their photos, and set up social media groups appealing for any information about the missing students. Despite their efforts, no useful information surfaced. The last known sighting of Shannon was at the beauty salon she visited on Saturday. According to the hairstylist who attended her, Shannon only talked about the upcoming party and had no plans to stop anywhere else on the way. A gruesome discovery along the railroad tracks. It wasn't until Monday, January 8th, that the police finally began their search for the missing young couple, Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom. By this time, thanks to the efforts of their parents and friends, almost the entire city was aware of their disappearance. The day before, on Sunday, there were rumors about a horrifying discovery near the railroad tracks, but no concrete information was available. A railroad worker, inspecting the tracks in his assigned area, stumbled upon what appeared to be severely damaged human remains on the embankment alongside the tracks. The body was in a horrific state, with multiple injuries, and had been doused with a flammable liquid in an attempt to burn it. The police, responding to the scene, cordoned off the area and conducted a thorough examination. However, they were unable to find any significant clues or leads. After taking necessary photographs, the remains were sent to the morgue for an autopsy to determine the cause of death and to attempt identification, though it was clear that the extensive damage and effects of the fire would make this difficult. Forensic experts determined that the body belonged to a young man who had suffered a brutal death. The victim had multiple injuries inflicted while he was alive, indicating prolonged and severe assault. Almost all of his teeth had been knocked out or damaged by blows. He had been shot 3 times, twice in the back and a final, fatal shot to the head. Additionally, traces of seminal fluid from at least 3 different men were found in his body, along with distinctive tears, suggesting repeated violent assaults. When police checked recent reports of missing young men, Christopher Newsom fit the description in age, height, and build. The officers contacted his parents and requested DNA samples for confirmation, but strongly advised against personal identification at the morgue as the burnt remains barely resembled human features. Unfortunately, the DNA analysis confirmed that the body belonged to the missing student, Newsom. Despite the distressing news about Christopher, Shannon Christian's parents still clung to the hope that their daughter was alive, possibly being held somewhere. Her mobile phone was last pinged on the day the couple disappeared in one of Knoxville's more troubled neighborhoods, a place they wouldn't have visited by choice. This indicated that they were likely brought there against their will, and Shannon might still be held in the area. In a secluded alley of this neighborhood, Shannon's Toyota 4Runner was found abandoned. It was in a terrible state, so much so that Dina and Gary Christian hardly recognized their daughter's car. The SUV was dirty, scratched, with broken headlights and deflated tires. All of Shannon's personal belongings were missing from the car, which was littered with cigarette butts, and the seats were torn and stained. The driver's seat was pushed far back, suggesting that a large adult male had been the last one to drive it. A crumpled envelope with the address 2316 Chipman Street was found on the floor between the seats, likely dropped by the perpetrator. A local witness reported seeing 4 African-American males driving the SUV that Saturday evening, a vehicle that stood out in that area. Fingerprints on the envelope led the police to Lamarcus Davidson, previously convicted for serious offenses. His residence, located in an industrial area near a wasteland, lacked witnesses. When no one responded to the police's knock and offer to surrender, they forced entry, hoping to find Shannon alive inside. Inside the house, they found Shannon's purse, a stuffed toy from her car, as well as Christopher's headphones and baseball cap, a knife with blood traces, torn and blood-stained fragments of women's clothing, and Shannon's lifeless body were discovered in the house's trash chute system, hidden under dirty sheets. She was bound in the fetal position and wrapped in 5 trash bags. Experts later concluded that she likely passed away in the early hours of Monday, January 8th. This tragic finding suggested that if the police had begun their search immediately after the missing persons report, rather than waiting for 24 hours, Shannon might have been saved. A horrific state of suffering. The condition of Shannon Christian's body was a horrifying sight even for seasoned forensic experts, as there was not a single untouched area on her. Shannon was covered from head to toe with bruises, abrasions, cuts, and cigarette burns. The numerous tears and injuries to her genital area, as well as her oral cavity and throat, indicated that she had been subjected to multiple assaults by several men. Shannon sustained a serious head injury and internal bleeding in the abdominal area, likely resulting from being kicked. Furthermore, the merciless assailants inflicted several penetrating, though not fatal, stab wounds on her and extinguished dozens of cigarettes on her skin. In a brutal attempt to destroy DNA evidence on her body, the perpetrators doused her with household bleach, paying particular attention to bleeding wounds and her genital area. She was also forcibly made to ingest bleach. After these torturous acts, Shannon, still alive, was wrapped in 5 trash bags and then shoved into a household trash chute, covered with sheets and rags. She slowly suffocated and bled to death, helplessly trapped with no chance of escape or calling for help. 5 merciless perpetrators. Lamarcus Davidson, in whose house the mutilated body of Shaman Christian and personal belongings of the deceased Christopher Newsom were found, was immediately declared a fugitive. The police also tracked down another suspect, Eric Boyd, whose traces were found at the crime scene. Boyd was apprehended on January 11th, without resistance, and agreed to cooperate with the investigation, claiming he wouldn't go to prison for crimes he didn't commit. Boyd revealed that Davidson was hiding in a vacant house listed for sale and personally led the police to the location. Davidson, unprepared for this turn of events, was caught off guard and offered no resistance. Notably, at the time of his arrest, Davidson was wearing sneakers that had belonged to the deceased student. During interrogations, Davidson tried to minimize his role, portraying himself as a victim. He claimed that the couple had come to his house looking to buy banned substances, but were caught up in a conflict with his acquaintances. Davidson insisted that he left to avoid involvement, and the subsequent brutal acts occurred in his absence. Further interrogations revealed 3 more individuals involved in the case. Davidson's friend, George Thomas, his half-brother, Latalvis Cobbins, and an 18-year-old woman named Vanessa Lynn Coleman. Once all 5 suspects were in custody, they were placed in separate cells and interrogated individually. Each tried to deflect blame onto the others, inadvertently revealing details of the heinous crime. Their fragmented accounts helped piece together the event's chronology and each perpetrator's role in the brutal act. A timeline of tragic events. Lamarcus Davidson, who had been released from prison on parole just a few months before these events, was desperately in need of money. He was involved in the sale of banned substances and urgently required a vehicle to deliver these to his customers. Davidson decided to steal a car from an underground parking lot, known for its lack of surveillance cameras, and headed there with his accomplices. Tragically, at that moment, students Shannon and Christopher were in the parking lot, arguing over Chris's delay. The criminals, deciding to leave no witnesses, forced the couple into the trunk of a car at gunpoint. The pair was taken to Davidson's house, where they were brutally beaten and repeatedly assaulted. After midnight, a barefoot and undressed Christopher was again forced into the trunk and taken to the railroad tracks. He was ordered to walk on the stones before being shot twice in the back. His torment was ended with a final shot to the head. His body was then doused with a flammable liquid and set on fire in hopes of destroying any evidence that could lead to the perpetrators. Having dealt with Newsom, the criminals returned to the house where Shannon remained bound. She endured horrific cruelty the next day, leaving her without a single uninjured area on her body. The sadists concluded their torture by dousing her with bleach and packing her, still alive, into plastic trash bags, where she slowly suffocated. The exact moment when young Vanessa Coleman joined the group was unclear. During interrogations, she claimed to be a hostage herself, participating in the torture out of fear for her life. However, Boyd indicated that Coleman was Davidson's girlfriend and willingly participated in the events, even taking some of Shannon's jewelry and mobile phone. Further, a personal diary found at Vanessa's home contained her descriptions of the horrors at her boyfriend's house, which she referred to as an exciting adventure. The initial trials and sentences during the investigation, it was established that Lamarcus Davidson, born in 1981, was the leader of the criminal group and the primary instigator of the brutal acts against the innocent victims. Davidson tried to deflect blame and downplay his role in the atrocities, attempting to shift responsibility onto the deceased themselves. Davidson claimed that the couple came to his house to buy banned substances and later suggested engaging in rough intimacy with him and his friends, a situation he said spiraled out of control. Remarkably, the defendant's lawyers latched onto this version, attempting to tarnish the reputations of the deceased in court. The parents of the victims later expressed immense emotional anguish over these claims. Nevertheless, Davidson was found guilty on 40 counts, including assault, kidnapping, robbery, and particularly cruel and premeditated termination of life, among others. The jury unanimously decided that Davidson deserved the death penalty for his heinous acts. Latalvis Cobbins, born in 1982, faced the death penalty for his role in the torture, assaults, and involvement in the termination of life. However, he was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. George Thomas, born in 1983, received a similar life sentence for his involvement in the same crimes, with no chance of release. Eric Boyd, considering his cooperation with the investigation and assistance in capturing Davidson, was sentenced to 18 years of imprisonment. The relatives of both victims found this sentence outrageously lenient. As for Vanessa Coleman, born in 1988, the only female participant in the atrocities, the investigation proved her involvement in the torture, assaults, and in Shannon's tragic end. She was sentenced to 53 years in prison. Overturned verdicts and new hearings in 2011 while the criminals were serving their sentences and Davidson awaited execution. The case took an unexpected turn. The presiding judge resigned, admitting to a substance dependency. His ability to conduct trials was questioned, and his verdicts over the last 2 years were annulled, leading to new hearings, including the case of Christian and Newsom. A new judge scheduled hearings for all 5 individuals involved in the student's tragic end. After the retrials, Davidson's sentence remained unchanged, death penalty. Tobins continued to serve his life sentence without the possibility of parole. Thomas, however, received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 51 years. Vanessa Coleman's sentence was reduced from the original 53 years to 35 years. Her appeal in 2014 was rejected and parole was denied in 2017. In 2020, the parole board decided she would remain incarcerated at least until April 2032. Eric Boyd's situation changed most dramatically. Originally receiving a relatively short sentence for cooperating with the investigation, his involvement in the assaults and tragic end of both victims was later proven. His retrial resulted in a life sentence without parole, with his accomplice Thomas testifying against him, revealing previously unknown details about Boyd's role. For his testimony, Thomas, who initially had the possibility of parole after 51 years, had his sentence reduced by 15%, contingent on good behavior. Boyd's attempts to appeal his new sentence were unsuccessful. He is currently serving his sentence in the Bledsoe County Correctional Complex. Davidson remains in the maximum security Riverbend institution, awaiting the execution of his death sentence. Public reaction and the case's impact. As previously mentioned, this trial garnered significant attention, widely covered in the press and leading to the enactment of 2 laws. The first was aimed at protecting victims from defamation, attempts to shift blame onto them, and portraying them negatively. This was in response to the defense strategy of the accused and their lawyers, who tried to label the students as drug users and thrill seekers in a troubled neighborhood. These claims were completely false and caused immense pain and suffering to the victims' families. The second law eliminated the need for a judge's signature on a jury's unanimous verdict, which, if in place during this case, could have prevented the need for retrials and sentence reviews. The house at 2316 Chipman Street, which became a torture chamber for the young couple, was demolished in the fall of 2008. A memorial was erected on the site in honor of Shaman Christian and Christopher Newsom. In memory of Christian, a golf tournament and a Christian charity foundation were established, providing support to victims of violence. Similarly, a foundation in Newsom's name was created, holding annual memorial baseball tournaments at Halls Park and awarding a scholarship named after the deceased student and former baseball player. It's important to note that, despite the public outcry and widespread attention, the media initially misrepresented details of the case, either accidentally or intentionally. Many believed that the variations in reporting and delayed coverage were influenced by racial motives, as the victims were white and the perpetrators were African American. However, the head of the Association of Criminal Writers and Editors noted, "I can't confidently say that this case would have received more attention if 5 white criminals had been accused of committing similar atrocities against 2 black individuals." Additionally, the Knoxville police chief stated that there was no evidence to suggest these crimes were committed based on racial animosity. Kelly Clayton had everything going for her. First of all, she was quite smart and bright since high school. She was a role model for other students, active in school, excelled in tests, and passed exams just as well. At the same time, outwardly, she never looked like a girl who spent days and nights sitting over textbooks, cramming lessons, and writing out something from additional literature. No. On the contrary, her looks were considered model-like, and if her grades had left much to be desired, she could have built a modeling career. She could have, but she didn't. After high school, she went to teacher training university to become a chemistry teacher, the insane pride of her parents. But only for the first few years of university. It is not known what turning point happened to her then, but one day, Kelly took her documents from the institution and, calling her parents, said that she no longer wanted to study, that she was too young to spend the rest of her life checking notebooks and raising ungrateful children. If she wants to, she will definitely return to her educational endeavors. In the meantime, she wants to travel and live life to her heart's content. Not the best idea, according to her parents, who were so upset that they didn't communicate with their daughter for 6 months. But perhaps if it wasn't for this desperate act, Kelly would never have met Tom Clayton. They met at a party of mutual friends, and the young man really liked the girl. Firstly, he, from the first minutes of acquaintance, began to court Kelly and show signs of attention, and secondly, Tom had a beautiful appearance and athletic physique, and all because the guy was a hockey star. For 4 consecutive seasons, he played for the semi-professional team Jackals, and in it, he was considered a strongman, a player who was able to break the opponent's ribs only if he did not approach the gate. But only a sports career, and especially built on strength and aggression, will someday fail, and Tom had to put the stick in the far corner and enjoy hockey only from the stands or from the couch, watching his favorite team on the TV screen. The couple had to move on with their lives, and first they returned to New York, where they got married, then moved to North Carolina, and then moved to the tiny town of Cato, numbering only a few thousand people. There, Tom franchised a company to rebuild houses after fires or disasters, and worked in a related profession for a friend's company. As for Kelly, after dropping out of university, she worked as a waitress, only changing places, and now she had 2 children. However, Tom was earning well enough, and Kelly could quit her job at any time and take care of her beautiful daughters, but she still believed that extra money would never be superfluous. Besides, she could use it to buy toys for her children and spoil them in every possible way. On September 28, 2015, Tom, as usual, went to play poker with his friends the Millers. He never took his wife to such events. Playing for money implied certain skills and experience in the game. Besides, someone had to stay at home with the children, and a family trip would have turned such gatherings into a noisy buffoonery and would not have brought any pleasure from gambling. That evening, Tom was not lucky in the game, but he did not get up from the table, but on the contrary, tried to win back and offered anyone who wanted to stay to play until morning, but no one supported him, and he went home. At home, however, a terrible picture opened before him. His beloved wife was lying in her own pool of blood, badly beaten and, at first glance, was not breathing. Tom panicked and ran through the rooms looking for his children, and luckily, they were fine but very frightened. He grabbed his daughters and headed to his neighbor Derek's house, trying to make sure the children didn't see their mother's mutilated body, and already from the neighbor's house, he dialed the police number. The officer who arrived on the scene found Tom sitting on his knees in front of his wife's body, trying to give her artificial respiration. Only the EMTs were able to pull the man away who voiced the terrible and unpleasant information. Kelly had been dead for a long time, and neither they nor he could do anything to help her. All 2 floors of the house were drenched in blood. A major mess was in the bedroom. Apparently, there had been a struggle between Kelly and the perpetrator who had committed his atrocity, despite the fact that there were children in the house at the time. Kelly was pushed down the stairs, evidenced by the knockdown banister, and beaten on the head with a blunt object until they were sure she was dead. There were no hints of knife or gunshot wounds. The policeman who filmed the crime scene noted to himself that Tom was shocked by what had happened and seemed lost in space. He walked from one corner of the room to another, entered the room for a split second, and immediately left it, and he could not tell the policeman where the children's room was or where the emergency exit from the house was. But when asked where Tom himself was at the time of the murder, he answered calmly that he had been at a friend's house all evening, where they were playing poker. Then the policeman, who did not get any clear information from Tom, went to the neighbors to ask some questions of the children. Tom's eldest daughter, Charlie, referred to the perpetrator as a robber. According to the words of the eldest daughter, she and her sister were almost asleep, but they heard their mother start screaming loudly from the next room. "Charlie, run! Run away from here!" And then the whole place shook like an earthquake. The girls, after listening to their mother, cautiously went out of their room, but saw the criminal leaning over their mother and beating her with what appeared to them to be a hammer. The girls ran back into the nursery, closed the door with a small nightstand, and hid under the bed. It was a good thing the criminal wasn't looking for them, because that nightstand, as the policeman pointed out, was so small that it would hardly have apprehended a burglar. Say, what did this burglar look like? Well, he was a big one, like a bear. That big? Wow. What was he wearing? Blue jeans and a black shirt. He was also wearing a mask, like the one Daddy wears when he goes hunting with Mr. Bourne to shoot ducks. So your daddy has a mask like that too. Will you show me? I'd have to ask him where it is. I don't know. What else did you notice when you saw the robber? He had eyes like Dad's, and I don't remember anything else. I saw him literally just a little bit, got scared, and we quickly ran back inside. Police officers checking the house were unable to confirm the girl's account that the perpetrator was a burglar. There were no signs of forced entry at either the front or back door, although on the other hand, the gate to the garage was open and the perpetrator could have entered the house through the garage. Another thing that the police noted is that nothing was stolen from the house. Jewelry was left untouched lying in a jewelry box, and the safe where Tom kept the cash was not even touched. The doors of the cabinets in the house were also all closed. Usually burglars check every little cabinet, every shelf, but here the whole mess was the aftermath of a fight. Experienced officers, it would seem, understood everything at once. Tom pretends to be a heartbroken husband, and it was he who killed his beloved wife and the mother of his children in order to further receive insurance payments. If Kelly's life was insured and husbands' murderers developing a crime plan always insure the life of their wives, then in case of her death, he could get up to $1 million. All that's needed is to gather evidence, and the case will be solved, especially since even her own daughter said that the mask on the robber was like her father's and eyes like her father. However, the police did not find the hunting mask in the house. After finding out where Tom had spent his time that night, the police questioned the other poker players. "Is Tom the killer? Do you really suspect him?" wondered one of his friends. "That poor guy had his wife murdered for crying out loud, and instead of looking for the bastard, you want to pin everything on him? How could you think of such a thing?" "No, Tom certainly couldn't have done it. I've known him a long time," replied another less emotional friend. "He worked 2 jobs around the clock because he loved both Kelly and his kids. There's just no way that could happen. Plus, he was with us all night. We played poker, and even when everyone was tired, he kept insisting on continuing to play. Tom really was suspicious that evening," said his acquaintance Laura. "During a break in the game, he took me into the next room and asked me to give him my phone to call his wife. He supposedly forgot his phone in the car and didn't want to go get it. I was first surprised that the car was 10 meters away from the house, go to it and get the phone, but still gave him a call. He stepped back to make the call outside. I didn't hear who or what he was talking to, but when I decided to check the outgoing calls, there were no numbers in the call history, so he just deleted the call. Wouldn't you agree that's odd? I told my husband about it, and he was as surprised as I was. My husband was sitting at the playing table next to Tom, and noticed that Tom was not watching the process of dealing cards or watching the people around him, which is very important in poker, but was sitting with his head bowed over the surface of the table, where the cards were hiding the screen of his phone. He had his phone on him. Why had he tricked me then? Where was he calling? Who couldn't he call from his phone? After Laura's testimony, the police once again questioned Charlie, Tom's daughter, and the girl repeated what she had told the policeman the first time. The robber looked a lot like her father. The next testimony was given by the niece of the murdered, already after Tom was behind bars. "I didn't tell Aunt Kelly. I just didn't want to upset her. She was very fond of Tom. She literally loved him, and besides, she has 2 children by him. They're my sisters. Who needs my truth? Tom was not the man he appeared to be at first glance. Yes, he occasionally spoiled my aunt with attention and flowers. He could easily babysit, which other fathers rarely do, but that was all at home, and at work, he was a completely different person. Kelly decided to help me one day, and arranged for Tom to take me to work for him. She was too young to be on her own, so she understood me as well as anyone and wanted the best for me. I worked for Tom all last summer, doing correspondence registration and document management. I didn't know him well before that, so at first we had a strictly working relationship. Then he got drunk somewhere and came to the office in that state. There was no one there but me and him, and for some reason, he started to tell me that his family was fictitious. He loves his daughters very much, but he doesn't care about his wife, and he hasn't had any feelings for her for a long time. He's even had a few affairs on the side during their marriage, and even considered leaving Aunt Kelly. But he didn't, simply because he was afraid that a divorce might leave him without a house and without money. Looking ahead, it is important to note that some of the interviewed female participants of that evening's poker game confirmed the words of Kelly's niece that Tom was not such a faithful husband and had a sexual relationship with two women who were also playing poker that night. In addition to the information about Tom's promiscuous life, Kelly's 16-year-old niece also told about another employee of Tom's firm, Michael Beard. Michael was doing repair work on houses after the fire, and he was doing a good job. But there was one moment in those houses where Beard worked, constantly missing things, and if the first few times Tom did not believe his customers, referring to the fact that during the fire the owners could lose something, then when the accusations of theft began to be repeated for the third and fourth time, there was no doubt. Michael Beard not only restores the floor and walls, but also steals. Plus, in addition to stealing, there were complaints that Michael was allowing himself to come to work drunk. I was in the office when Michael's stealing came to light. Tom could yell at his employee and kick him out on the street. He was upset with his subordinate's behavior like that. He kept asking him, "How could you? Or haven't you thought about your family? Where are you going to work now?" After the incident, Tom fired Beard, but still called companies he knew and offered them to hire his former employee. Tom recommended Michael, and when all his options were exhausted, Tom took Beard in to help with the household, cutting the grass, watering the plants, doing minor repairs around the house. The detective called Michael Beard in for questioning. He said he only stole because he and his family needed the money. Tom was very good to me, defended me to the end, but I know it was my own fault. He has a very good wife. She fed me when I worked for them, even though she really shouldn't have. She also gave my children clothes that her daughters had grown out of. I am very grateful for all they have done for me. I feel so bad for Kelly. When I heard about her death, I couldn't believe my ears. I felt so bad. I even went to church and prayed for her to go to the best of all worlds. The police did not find anything strange in Michael's story and let him go. But the interrogation of his wife, Mrs. Beard, made the police doubt his words. According to his wife Holly, Tom offered Michael some work, which he did not say. And for this work, he promised to pay him $10,000. Now that was interesting. Michael was called back to the station and had a lie detector hooked up to him. All questions were failed. Beard was lying and therefore failed the test. Realizing he couldn't get away with it, he began to testify. Indeed, Tom promised Beard $10,000 if Michael, on the day when Tom will play poker, sneak into his house, kill his wife, and set a fire in his house. The plan was to strangle Kelly and then make it look like she just burned to death in an accidental fire. Plus, the family home was insured for a very large sum of money. As the police checked, it was true. Kelly's home and life were insured at the highest rate. 2 cans of gasoline were waiting for Michael in the garage through which the house was to be entered. Everything was fine here. Beard entered the house when everyone was already asleep. He quietly began to climb the stairs and reach the bedroom where Kelly was supposed to be sleeping. But the young woman was either awake or awakened by the sound of the open door. And when she saw a strange man in the doorway, she began to scream in fright. Michael was just as frightened and pounced on Kelly, trying to close his huge hands around her neck. But it wasn't that easy. Kelly began to fight back. "I had no idea that a seemingly fragile Kelly had so much strength in her," says Michael. A heck of a fight ensued, which spilled over from the second-floor bedroom to the first-floor kitchen. Michael, because of the shock and panic, could not concentrate on the fight, but only waved his arms in all directions or just grabbed Kelly's clothes while Kelly, defending her life, aimed very accurately at Michael's face. And if the police had come to Beard earlier, they would have seen the marks from the beatings on him. But everything turned out as it did. After a long struggle, Michael hit Kelly's head against the wall with all his might. She fell, and for a while couldn't find the strength to get up. Michael took out a hammer and began hitting the young woman's head with it until she stopped showing signs of life. Michael, maddened by what had happened, just ran out of the house, even forgetting that Tom asked him not only to kill Kelly, but also to set the house on fire to cover up the crime. Michael had an accomplice, Mark Blanford, who in fact served only as a driver. The day before it happened, I got a call from Michael. I had worked with him on a construction site for a long time, and I had stayed with him for a couple weeks last year, so I knew him well. I knew Michael was into petty theft, so when he called me and asked me to drive while he broke into someone's house, I wasn't surprised. I wanted to turn him down, but he offered me $500. I thought long and hard at first, but he talked me into it. He said he just wanted to rob a businessman, and he needed help to get out of there before the cops got there. He said he'd help with the car. I gave in to his entreaties, but on the condition that I park somewhere far away from the house, he agreed. That evening, I waited for him in that car in a dark alley, and he came back quickly enough, breathing heavily and telling me to move as fast as possible. He didn't have any bag or sack on him, which didn't look much like a robbery. I didn't ask him any questions along the way, simply because I didn't want to know anything. I just wanted my $500, which, by the way, I didn't end up getting. On the way out, he asked me to stop at a bridge over a creek a couple blocks south of here. I stopped there. He hastily stripped off his outer garments and threw them off the bridge. If you need to be shown the place, I'll show you. Indeed, police officers who arrived on the scene at Mark's behest found parts of Michael's outer clothing near the creek, as well as the hammer used to kill Kelly. Michael, already in custody on suspicion of first-degree murder, began to change his testimony. According to him, he was indeed hired by Tom, indeed for $10,000, but only to commit arson at the house and nothing more. There was no question of murder. When he went into the house, however, Kelly was already dead. And who killed her? The detective asked. I think it was Tom. He offered me money for murder and arson from the beginning, but I refused the first offer. I'm not willing to kill a man for any money. He said I had nothing to fear, but he never could talk me into it. You may not believe me, but I almost lost my mind when I saw Kelly's body. I knew right then and there that he was setting me up, so I ran out of the house. He's the killer, Michael insisted. Michael spent a very long time assuring the police of his innocence, and all because he did not know that Mark had shown the place where Bird had thrown out his things, and that his clothes, as well as the murder weapon, had already been submitted for examination. And the experts found both on his clothes and on the hammer the blood of Kelly Clayton. And that was the most direct proof that it was him who killed Kelly, not someone else. In turn, Tom also did not admit that it was he who ordered the massacre of his wife from a former problem employee of his company. According to him, Michael knew that he had money, knew that he was not poor, and because Bird lost his job, as well as because of resentment associated with the dismissal, he decided to rob his house. But Kelly was at home that night, for which he paid with his life. It might have been difficult to prove Tom's guilt and his conspiracy with Michael if Laura, the woman who had been playing poker that night, had not told the police that Tom had called from her cell phone. The detective requested a transcript of her calls, and expectations were confirmed. Then, on the night of September 28th of 29, Tom Clayton called Michael Bird. Michael was the first to go to trial. He continued to insist that he had been hired to set fire to the house in order to collect the insurance payout. He didn't kill Kelly, and as for the blood on his clothes, it was just because he was touching a dead and mutilated body. That's why he got dirty. He'd thrown his stuff away so no one would think he'd been at Clayton's house that night. His speech sounded convincing. The jury had been deliberating for 7 hours. In the end, they concluded that Michael Bird was guilty on all counts. He was facing life in prison. As for Tom, his lawyers were able to obtain records of conversations and correspondence between him and Michael, and none of the conversations clearly discussed their devious plan. The prosecution's requests for billing transcripts of his movements yielded no concrete results either. All the evidence was circumstantial. If it weren't for one nuance, the car in which Mark had given Michael a ride was registered to Tom's company, and Tom, coming to the office on his personal Toyota, left it in the parking lot, where for some reason moved to the company pickup truck, which later drove to Michael's house and left there and took back the day after the tragedy. That is, in fact, he gave Michael the car on which he and Mark went to the crime. It was this fact that was testified to at the trial by the jury, The trial lasted 6 days, and the jury concluded that Tom had hired Michael to commit this horrible crime after all. Michael, in turn, filed an appeal. In his defense, he used the words of little Charlie, who said that the eyes in the slit of the mask belonged to her father. However, the court rejected the appeal because the description of the clothes matched the one found under the bridge. As a result, Tom Clayton and Michael Beard received life sentences. As for Mark, he was charged with manslaughter, for which he received 4 years in prison. Tom and Kelly's children were given custody to Kelly's sister, Kim. After some time, Charlie has moved on from the tragedy. She occasionally remembers her mom, but absolutely won't talk about her father, who she will never see again. The events described in this video took place in 2008 in Auburn, Alabama, USA. Although 15 years have passed since then, the final word in the Lauren Burke case has yet to be spoken. Lauren Ashley Burke was born December 30th, 1989, in Marietta, Georgia. Her parents, James Burke and Vivian Gershon, later divorced. Lauren had a sister, Jacqueline Burke, and a brother, Chad Burke. After high school, Lauren went to Auburn University, where she studied graphic design, was an active member of Delta Gamma sorority, played lacrosse, and was generally active in the campus community. Lauren was described by her friends as a well-liked, excellent student, always smiling, happy, and helpful. While still a high school student, Lauren started dating a guy named Sean McQuaid. After high school, they both enrolled at Auburn University, where they continued their relationship. At this point in life, getting an education was a priority for both young people, but that didn't stop them from making plans for their future together. Unfortunately, however, not all of Lauren's plans and dreams were destined to come true. She started the morning of March 4th, 2008, by having breakfast at a cafe with her boyfriend, Sean. At 11 o'clock, Lauren went to class, after which she called her father, James, to discuss plans for the spring break and a visit to the dentist. After finishing her conversation with her father, she went to Sean's dorm, where she stayed until the evening. At 8:30 p.m., she had an appointment with her classmate, Michael. They were to meet in the library and prepare a study assignment together. When Lauren, around 8 p.m., left Sean's room, it was already dark outside. Her car, a black 2001 Honda Civic, was parked in the parking lot next to the dorm, and she moved towards it. That was the last time Sean saw Lauren. Michael, whom Lauren was supposed to meet at the library, started calling her cell phone after she didn't show up for her appointment, but Lauren didn't answer for some reason. He kept calling over and over, and finally he heard Lauren's voice on the other end. She said she wasn't coming to the library because she'd forgotten all about the appointment, and then she hung up. A little later, at about 9 p.m., 911 received a call about an injured girl who had been seen lying on the road between the Farmville Baptist Church and Route 280 on the 147 freeway. It was Lauren. Drivers stopped their cars in the roadway, blocking traffic in both directions. Lauren was lying on her back in the middle of the road, taking slow, deep breaths. She was suffocating. There were many wounds on her body, and only socks on her feet. At 9:12 p.m., the first police car arrived on the scene, at which point Lauren was already unconscious. A few minutes later, paramedics arrived, and as they loaded Lauren into the ambulance, her pulse was barely palpable. At 9:35 p.m., Lauren was taken to East Alabama Medical Center, where doctors began trying to save her life. 8 minutes earlier, at 9:27 p.m., 911 dispatchers received multiple reports of a car fire on the Auburn University campus. Firefighters and police were immediately sent to the address the callers gave. Unable to find the owner of the burning car among the crowd of curious students attracted by the fire from their dormitories, police checked the license plates and discovered that the owner of the car was someone named James Burke, a resident of Georgia. James Burke is Lauren's father. The police contacted James by phone and learned that the actual owner of the fire-ravaged Honda was his daughter, Lauren, who attends Auburn University. James immediately asked what was wrong with his daughter, but the police officers had nothing to say. They didn't know where Lauren was and told James that no one was in the burning car. After James talked to the police officer, he immediately started calling his daughter's cell phone, but she didn't answer, which only added to his anxiety. Unable to reach Lauren, James first called friends of his daughter that he knew, but none of them knew anything about her whereabouts or the car fire. He then called his ex-wife and Lauren's mother, Vivian Gershon, hoping that maybe she knew where their daughter might be. Lauren's mother didn't know anything about what had happened either. At 9:40 p.m., Vivian called her daughter's boyfriend, Sean. That's how Sean found out that Lauren was missing and that her car had been burned. Sean, calling mutual acquaintances of Lauren and trying to find out if anyone had seen her that evening, learned that she had canceled a meeting at the library, saying she had forgotten about it. However, Sean knew for a fact that Lauren hadn't forgotten about her appointment for the evening, as when she left his room about 2 hours ago, she had planned to go straight to the library. While family and friends tried to figure out where Lauren had gone, doctors at East Alabama Medical Center were battling to keep her alive. Since Lauren was brought in unconscious and without any personal belongings or documents, the doctors did not know her name. Unfortunately, despite their best efforts, doctors were unable to save Lauren's life. She was pronounced dead about an hour after being admitted to the medical facility. The cause of her passing was a single bullet wound. The bullet, which had traveled out, had punctured both of Lauren's lungs. Experts concluded that the muzzle of the gun was only a few inches from Lauren's skin at the time of the shot. Police officers, comparing the girl's passing at the hospital and the burned-out car on campus whose owner was missing, quickly realized that the victim, who could not be saved by doctors, was Lauren Burke. The very next day, March 5, 2008, James Burke identified the body of his daughter after visiting from Atlanta. News of Lauren's passing quickly spread around campus. Auburn University released a statement about Lauren Burke's passing, urging students and staff to be extra cautious on and off campus, but assuring them that the campus is safe. Many of you and your parents have called and are understandably concerned. There is no indication of any additional danger to campus or student safety, the statement said. The Delta Gamma Society released a statement about what fraternity representatives called an unexpected and disturbing crime. The society urged Sisters of the Auburn branch to cooperate fully with detectives while they sort out what happened. While Lauren's family and friends were grieving, police were trying to figure out who took her life, how the car fire was connected to it, and whether other students should be wary. Both the spot along the road where Lauren Burke was found and the area around her car were processed for evidence. We have put every resource we can into finding the person responsible for this crime, said Auburn Police spokesman Captain Tom Stouffer. Auburn, Alabama, is a relatively quiet student community, and we take these things to heart. If someone gets hurt or dies, we all feel it, and we won't rest until we find the perpetrator. Stouffer also said that Alabama Governor Bob Riley offered a $10,000 reward for information, leading to an arrest in Burke's case. Lauren's charred car was taken to the Auburn Police Department. Investigators from the State Forensic Laboratory and officers from the State Fire Chief's office sifted through the remains of the car's burned interior. They found scraps of burned clothing, Lauren's melted digital camera, and the car owner's manual. A .38 caliber bullet was found under the front seat, which could mean the interior of the car was the scene of the crime, and the perpetrator had set it on fire to destroy the evidence. Detectives interviewed Lauren's family, friends, and boyfriend. None of them could name a single person who wanted to harm Lauren and was capable of doing so. Knowing that before her passing, Lauren was in a dorm at Sean's, the investigators searched his room, but nothing was found to link Sean to the crime. After speaking with Michael, whom Lauren was supposed to meet in the library, detectives learned that when Lauren answered his phone, he heard a noise similar to that of a moving car. At the same time, it emerged that someone had used Lauren's bank card several times, shortly after she was found lying in the road. In all likelihood, the person who had Lauren's bank card was involved in her incident, and the police began looking for him. However, events soon took an unexpected turn. Less than 3 days after Lauren's passing, at 9:55 a.m. on March 7, 2008, in the parking lot of the Walmart supermarket in Noonan, Georgia, about 75 miles from Auburn, a man of African descent attacked a 72-year-old woman as she was getting into her car. The attacker hit her on the head, threatened her, and told her to get in the passenger seat. He himself got into the driver's seat and tried to drive away from the parking lot, but noticed that an eyewitness to the attack was following him, talking to someone on the phone. The thought of the bystander calling the police prompted the perpetrator to return to the Walmart parking lot. He stopped and got out of the stolen vehicle, ran over to a nearby silver Chrysler Sebring, got in, and fled the scene in a hurry. A few hours later, four officers chased the fleeing Chrysler at high speed toward Columbus, West Georgia. The driver did not respond in any way to stop, endangering other road users. During the chase, police observed the driver of the Chrysler throwing an object out the window. One of the chase crews stopped and searched for the object. Police officers found a .38 caliber revolver on the side of the road. Meanwhile, the chase continued, but at one point, the perpetrator's vehicle broke down and smoke billowed from under the hood. The driver stopped abruptly in the roadway and opened the door. Next, a police officer, who was in pursuit on a motorcycle, crashed into the open door. After the collision, the officer flew over the handlebars of the motorcycle and fell to the pavement, only fortunately not seriously injured. The road where the perpetrator stopped was through a forest, and it was into the woods that he rushed to flee. He could not escape, however. The police quickly caught up with him and snapped handcuffs on his wrists. Courtney Larrell Lockhart was born on October 20th, 1984. In the words of his family, he was a nice, fun-loving guy until he joined the U.S. Army. He was sent to Iraq in 2004, from which he returned to someone else in 2005, according to his mother. He wasn't the Courtney I knew, his mother said. Courtney was a cheerful guy, but after he returned from Iraq, he never smiled again, never let anyone stand behind him, and sometimes hid in the closet or under the bed. In 2006, Lockhart and his girlfriend, with whom he had by this time broken up, had a daughter. Also in 2006, he was court-martialed for assaulting other soldiers, using illegal substances, and deserting his unit without permission. He spent 7 months in detention before being dishonorably discharged from the Army in December 2006. As 2008 approached, Lockhart was said to have gone increasingly off the rails. He barely showered, stopped visiting his daughter, and was heavily addicted to illegal substances. Beginning in February 2008, he committed a string of burglaries, and with the exception of a convenience store robbery, his methods were always the same. He would approach the victim from behind as she was getting into her car in the parking lot, threaten her with a gun, demand that she give him her purse, and attempt to take possession of the car. One such crime ended taking the life of Lauren Burke. Lockhart's string of assaults stopped on March 7, 2008, after he attacked a 72-year-old woman and failed to evade a police chase. After his arrest, Courtney Lockhart, 23, was taken to the police station, where he confessed that he was the one who kidnapped and took Lauren Burke's life. The interrogation was videotaped and became a key piece of evidence at trial. Plus, Lauren's personal belongings such as her iPod and bank cards were found in his car. He gave a detailed account of the events of the day he kidnapped Lauren. It was Tuesday, March 4, 2008. Lockhart woke up in his silver Chrysler Sebring. He had spent the previous night in his car, not far from East Alabama Medical Center. He needed money, so he started driving around Auburn looking for another victim. It's worth noting that all the people he attacked were women, none of them men. His drive ended on the campus of Auburn University, where he parked next to the student dorms. He spent several hours sitting in his car watching the students. Around 8 p.m., he noticed some girl walk up to the car parked next to him and leisurely open the door. It was Lauren. Without thinking long, Lockhart grabbed his revolver and approached Lauren from behind. Poking her with the muzzle of his gun, he asked her how much money she had on her. When he didn't get an answer, he pushed Lauren into the car, into the front passenger seat, and got behind the wheel. According to Lockhart, Lauren said nothing but screamed in fear. When she finally calmed down, she pulled $200 from her purse, handed it to him, and begged him to leave. Instead of leaving, however, he ordered Lauren to take off her clothes. At gunpoint, and hearing threats against her, Lauren complied, stripping off everything but a pair of socks. According to Lockhart, there was only one reason he made Lauren undress. He thought that if she had no clothes on, she would not want to escape. Lockhart then began to drive around the streets of Auburn. All the while, he was driving with one hand on the wheel and with the other holding Lauren at gunpoint. She tried to dissuade him from committing the crime, and when he said his life was over, Lauren promised to help him find a job. At some point, her phone started ringing. Lockhart told her to answer it and make something up so no one would suspect anything. It was a call from Michael, whom Lauren was supposed to meet at the library. When she answered, she said she had forgotten about the meeting and hung up right away. Lockhart said that they continued to drive through the streets of the city, and Lauren wouldn't give up trying to talk him into letting her go. She said she would help him overcome the difficulties he was facing. As they were driving down Highway 147, Lauren opened the door to jump out of the moving car, and at that point Lockhart said he accidentally fired a shot. As we now know, the fired bullet pierced both of Lauren's lungs, plus she sustained injuries from the fall. She managed to wave to passing drivers before her strength failed her and she lost consciousness. Lockhart told investigators that he parked outside the church and watched as cars began to stop next to Lauren lying on the pavement. Realizing that the police would be arriving any minute, he hurriedly fled. Planning to destroy the evidence he had left in the car, he drove to a gas station and bought a can of gasoline, which he paid for with Lauren's bank card. He doused the interior of the car with the gasoline he bought, then got in and drove to the campus where he abducted Lauren, because his Chrysler was parked there. According to Lockhart, as he drove, he became dizzy from the gasoline fumes, so he rolled down the windows to let air in from the street. You might be wondering why he didn't drive to the campus first and douse Lauren's car with gasoline there. Why did he drive on a powder keg, since a short circuit or spark could have caused the car to burn up with him? Perhaps it had something to do with Lockhart's mental problems or low IQ, but we shall talk about that a little later. Upon arriving on campus, Courtney took $46, an iPod, and her bank cards from Lauren's car before setting the car on fire and driving off in his Chrysler. He drove to a gas station where he paid for the gas with Lauren's money. He then returned to campus again to see if the car had burned all the way down. Investigators began to question whether all of Lockhart's testimony was true. They speculated that Lockhart had forced Lauren to undress, not so that she would not run away as he claimed, but for an entirely different purpose. But he could not get what he wanted because Lauren suddenly jumped out of the moving car. Also, the investigators doubted that Lockhart shot Lauren by accident. It seemed unlikely given the fact that Courtney had served in the army and knew well how to handle a gun. It seemed more logical that Lauren realized that Lockhart wasn't going to let her go and decided that her only chance of escape was to jump. She opened the door, and as she jumped out of the car and Lockhart shot her. Ballistics testing confirmed that the bullet found in Lauren's car was fired from the gun Lockhart had thrown out the window as he tried to evade a police chase. In addition, experts ran tests and ruled out the possibility of an accidental discharge. The trigger had to be pulled hard enough to make the shot. Lauren's family and friends bid her farewell on March 9th. The same day, investigators interrogated Lockhart for the second time. The next day, he was formally charged multiple times in the Lauren Berg case. The trial began on November 8, 2010. Lockhart's attorneys claimed that their client had a mental illness because of his military service and that the shooting of Lauren was accidental. According to court documents, Lockhart pleaded not guilty by reason of mental defect or insanity. The court was presented with the testimony of a psychologist who testified that Lockhart had an IQ of 86, which is below average, that he had some symptoms from being in combat in the military, but he did not have PTSD, and that Lockhart was immature and not thinking straight. Although the state attempted to introduce evidence of Lockhart's other crimes and his dishonorable conduct in the military, the trial judge excluded that evidence. After the guilt phase of trial, the sentencing phase immediately followed. Lockhart presented witness testimony and evidence in an attempt to cast himself as a war hero who was mentally disturbed by combat and the death of his commanding officer. The jury rendered a special verdict in which an additional aggravating factor was the taking of a person's life in the course of the kidnapping. The jury voted 12-0 to recommend a sentence of life without parole. The trial judge later disagreed with the jury's advisory sentence and sentenced Lockhart to death. In a 28-page sentencing order, the judge explained why he disagreed with the jury's opinion. He concluded that the kidnapping weighed heavily in favor of the death penalty. The victim was alone, unarmed, and she was chosen by Lockhart at random. The kidnapping is even more egregious because she was taken from a college campus, a place where students should feel safe, and forced into her own car. Lockhart forced her to undress and held her at gunpoint in order to prevent her escape. The court also emphasized that the jury was unaware of Lockhart's crime spree and the true nature of Lockhart's military service. Although the jury heard testimony regarding Lockhart's service, the jury was unaware of the full extent of Lockhart's military disciplinary record, wrote the judge. The court reasoned that, had the jury been aware of the additional facts known to the court, their sentencing recommendation would likely have differed. 15 years have passed since Lauren's death, and Lockhart is still on death row in Alabama and has not given up trying to appeal his sentence. After his conviction and death sentence, he appealed to an Alabama court, which upheld the sentence in August 2013. In April 2014, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals denied Lockhart's request for a retrial. He then appealed to the Supreme Court of Alabama, but in September 2014, his motion was again denied. In January 2015, Lockhart appealed to the Supreme Court of the United States. In April of that year, the Supreme Court of the United States denied his petition. In 2018, Lockhart made another attempt to challenge the sentence. Lawyers from a human rights organization who represented him tried to convince the court that the lawyers defending Lockhart in 2010 had mishandled the case. Although there were some flaws in Lockhart's 2010 defense, it ultimately did not change the outcome, with the death sentence being upheld again. In April 2021, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals upheld Lockhart's death sentence. Lauren's parents said they would never give up and would do everything in their power to keep Lockhart's death sentence from being overturned. Courtney Lockhart gave my daughter the death penalty. There's no reason why he shouldn't have the death penalty. That's all I have to say, Burke's father Jim said. He didn't give her a second chance. He shouldn't get a second chance either, Lauren's mother Vivian said. As of today, Courtney Lockhart remains on death row in Alabama. Heather, just 22 years old, had recently embarked on her college journey, settling into her job, and it felt like life was full of promise. Maple's smile and laughter were contagious, and her constant chatter filled the air. She radiated warmth and energy, uplifting everyone around her. Everything changed on January 7th, 2015, when Heather Maples didn't show up for work. Her lifeless body was discovered in her apartment, partly unclothed. Who had the right to take Heather Maples' life? Detectives faced a challenging investigation because Heather had no enemies, and the motive behind this crime remained unclear. If not for one small detail, Heather Maples' death could have remained unsolved, and the criminal would have gone unpunished. Oh, I guess it wasn't worth what I would say here. And your wife, the only way in her bloody vague figure there is urinary blood. Ain't that in your hand, or in your weight work? On a typical morning at the real estate agency in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, on August 7th, 2015, Kelsey Price arrived at work and began her usual tasks. Heather, her friend and colleague, was running late, which wasn't surprising to Kelsey, as Heather was known for her lack of punctuality. Kelsey started calling Heather to wake her up, but received no answer. The previous night, Heather had planned to go to a bar with some friends, and had asked Kelsey to come get her if she overslept or didn't answer her calls. Therefore, Kelsey wasn't concerned, and went to Heather's apartment to wake her up. The girls' apartments were located in the same complex where they worked. Upon arriving, Kelsey found the front door unlocked. Easily entering inside, she saw her friend lying on the bed, sleeping on her stomach, wearing only a crop top and no underwear. Assuming Heather had a wild night, Kelsey tried to wake her up, but there was no response. She then tapped Heather's foot, attempting to rouse her from her sleep, which no one would ever interrupt again. Maple's foot was so cold that Kelsey literally jumped back in horror at the realization of what had happened. Kelsey Price, in horror, stepped out of the apartment and called 911. Soon, emergency services were on the scene. Detective Tommy Massey was one of the first to arrive at the crime scene, and the forensic team meticulously combed through the apartment. Heather was indeed partially undressed, with signs of blows on her face. The hair of the poor girl was soaked in blood, which was also splattered on the walls. It was clear she had been brutally beaten, tortured, and actually assaulted. Massey and his colleague, Detective Maples, coincidentally sharing Heather's surname, recalled this crime as a horrifying nightmare. That's understandable, as witnessing such a heart-wrenching scene is extremely difficult. Heather Nicole Maples was born on August 23, 1992, in Ocala, Florida. Her mother jokingly called Heather a hurricane baby. This nickname was entirely justified, as many envied the energy and courage that Heather possessed. In 2004, Jennifer Hunter gave birth to her second child. Heather welcomed a brother, Ryan, into her life with great joy. However, Ryan was later diagnosed with significant developmental delays, and the older sister, of her own accord, dedicated all her free time to him. She took care of him, happily spent time with him, taught him to speak, walk, and eat on his own. Heather was in the 7th grade at the time, and devoted all the following years until graduation to Ryan, showing immense love and dedication to her brother. At the age of 22, Heather Maples made the bold decision to leave her Texas home and embark on a new chapter in Tennessee, pursuing her dream of becoming a psychologist. The journey began with a call from her former classmate, Chaz, inviting her to join him in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where he studied. According to him, it was the perfect place for Heather, with a small college town where she could get a great opportunity to prepare for college. Heather accepted, and in January 2015, the future student went to Chaz in Murfreesboro. By the way, their relationship soon turned romantic. A completely different life began for the girl. With the support of her best friend Kelsey, Heather found a job in the office of the residential complex where they lived. Maples was balancing work with her college preparations. Her friends and family supported her. Everything seemed to be going well, but soon her relationship with Chaz began to crumble, which led to a breakup, and Chaz moved away. At the beginning of August, she excitedly called her mother to share this wonderful news. She had been accepted to college. Her mother, filled with pride, was thrilled for Heather's achievement. However, a week later, Heather failed to show up for work, sparking concern and uncertainty. The detectives understood that, considering the nature of the crime, it could have been related to Heather's personal life. At that point, most of her friends were considered suspects, and frankly speaking, there were reasons for that. Upon examining the apartment, there were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that Heather likely knew her attacker and possibly let them in herself. After a thorough investigation of the crime scene, several important pieces of evidence were discovered: unknown DNA and a hair that did not belong to the victim. All of this was sent for analysis to identify the suspect. However, the most significant piece of evidence was a clear bloody fingerprint on the right side of Heather's bed. Detective Massey explained that if someone had deliberately dipped their finger in ink and intentionally left their mark, it wouldn't have been so clear and precise. Of course, this print was sent for analysis as well. Additionally, Heather's mobile phone was found in the apartment, but without the password, accessing its contents was impossible. This is where Kelsey came in handy. She played a crucial role, not only helping with the phone, but also deciding to inform Heather's mother of her death, believing it would be better coming from someone who loved and cared for Heather. Detective Massey hoped to get a lot of information about Heather from her friend Kelsey Price. He wanted to know everything about the victim's personal life, especially her relationship with Chaz. Kelsey told the detective that the relationship was quite tense, as Chaz had obvious anger management issues, and sometimes he was too aggressive and cruel towards Heather, so the girl decided to end the relationship herself. Therefore, the police immediately decided to investigate Chaz, but an unexpected turn of events occurred. A young man named Michael was determined to access the crime scene despite the caution tape. He had keys to Heather's apartment. According to Michael, on the evening before her death, Heather called him and invited him for dinner, which he accepted. Immediately after dinner, Michael went home, unlike Heather, who went to a local bar with friends. But later, Heather reached out to Michael for help. As Michael recounted, Heather was in trouble. A young man named Ortavio was bothering her, and was quite aggressive. Immediately after the incident, Michael offered to drive Heather home. As per his statement, it was around 2:30 in the morning on August 7th, the last time he saw Heather. Additionally, during the interrogation, Michael mentioned that Heather's front door should have been unlocked because he had her keys since she was dressed in a dress, and didn't have pockets to carry them, and he simply forgot to return them after unlocking the door. Michael was very disappointed, and did not seem like a liar at all, but investigators had to take his fingerprints and a DNA sample. They also contacted the bar to obtain surveillance footage, which confirmed everything Michael had said during the interrogation. Analysis confirmed that the fingerprints and DNA found at the crime scene did not match his. After Michael was cleared as a suspect, investigators turned their attention to the man who had been with Heather that night, Ortavio. With Kelsey's help in unlocking Heather's mobile phone, interest in Ortavio significantly increased. Detectives discovered that Heather had messaged Ortavio, a friend of hers, inviting him to her apartment just hours before she was found dead. But why did Heather call Ortavio to her home after Michael had saved her from him? The answer was simple. They were friends, and became more persistent than usual at the bar. Heather was caught off guard. She wasn't prepared for this. Now, the detectives needed to speak with Ortavio to get his side of the story. I'll show you a picture, okay? Yeah, he had the old amulet. I kept it. A little longer. This one was... It hadn't changed. It hadn't changed. Yeah, I was there. I received it anyway. It was so sad. The detectives immediately realized that Ortavio was unaware of Heather's death, but what if he was somehow involved in this case? Meanwhile, the interrogation continued. Afterward, Massey eventually asked about the late-night message from Heather. She texted him a text 2-3 years later. Well, alright, he was on this one. The detectives intensified their questioning of Ortavio, using a tough interrogation method that not every suspect could withstand. Ortavio was shocked by what he heard. It seemed he genuinely didn't know what had happened to Heather. Following the interrogation, he willingly agreed to a DNA test, confident that it would clear his name. The results proved him right, as the DNA found at the crime scene did not match his, leading to his exclusion as a suspect. Without any leads, the detectives worked practically around the clock, reviewing surveillance footage, scrutinizing every detail provided by witnesses. On the 9th day of the investigation, as Detective Massey was preparing to leave the office late at night, he received a crucial call from one of the directors of the forensic laboratory. Massey finally got the answer regarding the bloody fingerprint that was lifted from Heather's bed. It belonged to a young man named Brandon Bowling, whose fingerprints were on file due to his employment at a company where he previously worked. This development prompted Detective Massey to approach the interrogation very gently, wanting to give Brandon a chance to explain what happened that night. Though he asked if his head had rebelled, Lewis eventually interrupted. The detectives knew he was lying because the fingerprint was fresh. It seemed that Brandon understood he was caught, but he continued to deny any involvement in Heather's death. After questioning, detectives requested a DNA test from Brandon, suggesting that if he was innocent, the test would prove it. Brandon did as he was asked, perhaps hoping to be released from police custody, but that did not happen. The investigators decided not to wait for the test results. The match of the fingerprint provided substantial grounds for the next step. The police immediately sent a request to the court for permission to access Brandon's phone, which could help the investigation confirm his movements, track calls, and texts on the night of the crime. However, they were unprepared for what they found on his phone after the court approval. The video from Brandon Bowling's phone was one of the most shocking, even to the most experienced detectives. In this video, the room of the core Heather was captured. Brandon recorded everything, from intimate acts to beatings. Heather was still alive at the time of the recording. In February 2018, Brandon Richmond Bowling pleaded guilty to the attack on Heather Maples. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison without the possibility of parole. On the day of the verdict, Heather's mother, Jennifer, made a speech that surprised many. When the trial ended, in the corridor, Jennifer approached Bowling's mother. Jennifer simply hugged this woman, saying that they both lost their children that day. Unfortunately, Brandon Bowling never explained his motives. What are your thoughts on this? What do you think Brandon's motive was, if there was one? In the early hours of May 25, 1996, Kristen Smart vanished. She was last seen at 2 a.m., allegedly intoxicated and passed out on a neighbor's lawn. 2 fellow students offered to help, unable to ignore her sorry state. A third, Paul Flores, stepped in to help, as he lived nearest to her Muir Hall residence. She was never seen again. Her trail went cold. For 2 decades, Flores' name continued to pop up on investigation radars. Despite an array of items of interest, no solid leads panned out. Kristen's disappearance sparked a change in legislation, ensuring safety for future students. Stan and Denise Smart welcomed Kristen Denise Smart into the world on February 20, 1977. She was born in Augsburg, Bavaria, in West Germany. Kristen's parents were both teachers of the time to children of American military personnel. When she was still a young child, they eventually moved back to Stockton, California. The eldest of 3 children, Kristen's mother Denise called her a dreamer. According to her family, Kristen had a great love of the ocean and an adventurous spirit. She had a real zest for life. Kristen graduated from Lincoln High School in Stockton in 1995. Prior to attending university, she worked as a lifeguard and camp counselor at Camp Mokulea in Hawaii. In 1996, Kristen enrolled at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, California. She had high aspirations, but was also indecisive. Initially, Kristen enrolled at Cal Poly to study architecture. She loved drawing. Later, she changed her major to communication studies. Denise said she wanted to be the next Joan London, traveling the world as a reporter. Memorial Day weekend 1996, Kristen called home and left a voicemail. Good news, I'll call home Sunday. The call never came. Like clockwork, Kristen checked in with her family every Sunday. But for the Smarts, all communications ceased that faithful weekend. Friday night, Kristen attended an off-campus birthday party. Her friend, Margarita Campos, recalled dropping her off. Campos said that Kristen seemed a little mad because she didn't join her for the evening. The last thing she said to Kristen was to be careful. Temperatures were warm, and Kristen wore a cropped gray t-shirt, black surf shorts, and red Puma sneakers. Witness statements from the party varied. Some alleged she was extremely intoxicated. Others claimed she didn't drink at all. Some believed she was possibly given a date rape drug. On May 25, 1996, at 2 a.m., fellow student Tim Davis spotted Kristen passed out on the lawn next door. Together with Cheryl Anderson, an acquaintance of Kristen, they both helped her walk back to her campus dorm, near Hall. It was then Paul Flores reached the group and offered to help take Kristen back to the residence. He was leaving the party too and spotted them on his way back to his own dorm, Santa Lucia Hall. Once all three reached the Cal Poly campus, Davis left the group since he lived off campus. Now down to three, Cheryl started to notice Paul's odd behavior. In her disposition, Cheryl remarked about the many stops made along the way. She also noted the familiar manner Paul had with Kristen. He held her around the waist, as Kristen wrapped her arms around his neck. Paul even suggested that Cheryl go ahead as they tried to catch up. Cheryl eventually went her own way, but not before double-checking with Paul about ensuring Kristen's safe return. Paul claimed he walked Kristen to the intersection of the hallways that led off to both their respective residence halls. This was around 2:30 a.m. on May 25, 1996. Kristen Smart has never been seen or heard from since then. When Sunday rolled around without a call from Kristen, Denise didn't grow immediately concerned. With Monday being a holiday, anything could have come up. Kristen's roommate, a neighbor, however, found it unusual. They contacted the university police department to report Kristen missing. No report was taken. Concerned, they called Kristen's family and the San Luis Obispo Police Department. On May 27, 1996, Denise received a call from the UPD asking if Kristen had returned home for the weekend. She hadn't. The UPD only filed the missing persons report 3 days after her last sighting. Kristen's roommate, Crystal Calvin, revealed that none of her personal belongings were missing. This suggested to authorities that Kristen probably didn't make it back to her room. Paul Flores was now a person of interest. He was the last known person to see Kristen. 5 days after Kristen went missing, Paul was interviewed by the UPD investigators. He told investigators they both went their own directions at the intersection. Investigators, however, were quick to notice Paul's black eye. When asked about it, Paul said he was elbowed in the face during a basketball game. A friend later refuted this story. He insisted that the black eye was there before the basketball game. Paul allegedly told him he didn't know how he got the black eye. He just woke up with it. A month later in June, Paul was interviewed again. This time confessing he lied about the black eye incident. Paul changed his story. He apparently hit his eye on the steering wheel of a truck. When questioned further, Paul said that the story sounded unlikely. Paul told investigators he was in his truck at around 2 a.m. on the morning of May 27, 1996, installing a car radio because he was selling his truck. Family lawyer for the Smarts, James R. Murphy Jr., said Paul was last seen with Kristen after the party. His injuries looked consistent with those of someone involved in an altercation. Cadaver dogs were called in to assist in the search for Kristen on June 29, 1996. 4 dogs trained to search for human remains were used individually to search Santa Lucia Hall. Each dog alerted to room 128, Paul Flores' room. The dogs showed no interest apart from the corner of one mattress. A mattress Flores told investigators belonged to him. CARTA dog handler Adela Moros said cadaver dogs can detect the slightest physiological changes. Their reactions during the search indicated a strong possibility of a dead body being in room 128. A second handler, Gail Larocque, recalled the behavior of her boxer, Tori. When allowed to search, Tori repeatedly searched the left side of room 128, the side used by Paul Flores. The dog's behavior and strong reaction indicated she found a scent, but was still searching for its source. Paul Flores remained the strongest suspect. Nobody meant no formal charge. Paul went on to live his life as a free man shrouded in a cloak of suspicion. From 1996 through 2007, investigations continued. Searches were conducted in all possible locations, including 4 properties owned by the Flores family. None of them yielded any positive results. On the advice of his lawyer, Paul Flores pleaded the Fifth. The Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution protects individuals from incriminating themselves. The person who invokes this clause cannot be compelled to provide information that they feel could incriminate them further. Paul, therefore, had the right to remain silent during his 1997 deposition. Attorney James R. Murphy hit a brick wall. Paul's silence and refusal to cooperate left investigators scrambling for new leads. Although all evidence left back to Paul, former Sheriff Ed Williams himself said he saw no way of completing the case. Authorities were getting frustrated. The Smarts took it upon themselves to file a wrongful death charge. The court, however, decided against proceeding with the charges. Kristen's case was still an active criminal investigation. Paul and his family refused to publicly address the case of Kristen Smart or the accusations against them. Although Derek Tsay, one of Paul's roommates, said Paul allegedly joked about Kristen's disappearance, these allegations remain speculation, as Paul shielded himself against further questioning by lawyering up. 6 years after going missing on May 25, 2002, with no remains having been found, Denise Smart confessed it was a bittersweet moment of closure. Then Chris Lambert broke the silence. Chris was 8 years old when Kristen went missing. Haunted by the ever-looming billboard over Arroyo Grande, Chris found himself asking why there were still no answers all these years later. Hearing about Kristen's disappearance at a young age frightened him. Chris became fixated by the case. In May 2018, he quit his job at a musical instrument shop to work on the podcast full-time. With no formal training in law or journalism, he was driven only by a passion for answers. He began asking questions to see if he could get people talking. In 2019, Chris's determination paid off. He decided to visit the memorial to Kristen on Shell Beach on her birthday, February 20th. Armed with a cell phone, Chris waited to meet someone willing to talk about Kristen. As luck would have it, he ran into Kristen's mom there and was able to talk with her about her daughter. From there on, Chris and the Smarts developed a strong relationship and worked on getting Kristen's story out to the public. The podcast, In Your Own Backyard, took on a life of its own. What started as a local series exploded onto the national scene. To date, it has raked in over 11 million downloads. The podcast follows the case of Kristen Smart and her disappearance from the Cal Poly campus. Chris had a knack for getting people to talk to him. He was able to obtain interviews with people related to the case to varying degrees. Chris searched for witnesses that were reluctant to speak or overlooked by investigators. He was able to uncover multiple allegations that remained mere speculations over the years. A former colleague of Paul's mother, Susan, claimed she complained about not sleeping well after her husband got a call in the middle of the night during the Memorial Day weekend. He left in his car after the call. Another claim came from one of Susan's tenants. This time, the tenant told Chris that every morning after Kristen's disappearance at 4:20 a.m., an alarm would go off from the area of the backyard. A third interview with an Australian exchange student brought to the forefront a possible altercation between Kristen and Paul. According to Chris, the student alleged to have seen Kristen fighting off Paul on the night she disappeared. In an effort to tie up all of the speculations made by people interviewed by Chris, certain theories were highlighted. The first being that Paul got a black eye during a tussle with Kristen. The second, that Paul's father, Ruben Flores, helped cover up the crime. And the third, that the body of Kristen Smart was buried in the backyard of the Flores home. Another disturbing development in his investigation was that Chris uncovered allegations of gross misconduct by Paul over the years. Women who went to school or worked with Paul reported his overly flirtatious behavior and excessive drinking habits. For women approached the Daily Beast, alleging Paul had sexually or physically assaulted them. An ex-girlfriend even went as far as to claim that Paul brandished a butter knife in her face during a fight. 13 more women had accusations leveled against Paul, including predatory behavior, harassment, and sexual assault. Although Chris has made 2 attempts to contact Paul, he had no success. He figured an interview could tie up loose ends, but more importantly, it would give Paul a chance to explain the allegations against him and give his side of the story. However, he refutes the claim that Chris tried making contact with her family. Susan stated she could shoot plenty of holes into Chris' investigation. Sheriff Ian Parkinson of the San Luis Obispo Sheriff's Department credits Chris for helping move the investigation forward. Parkinson commended Chris on putting together a well-done podcast. He said getting the story out there persuaded people to come forward, the value of which has been a game changer. Denise Smart also credited Chris, saying the stars aligned when the podcast aired. Denise further thanked Parkinson for putting vigor back into the case of Kristen since taking office in 2011. Despite the continued silence of the Flores family, the investigations along with the podcast shook their precarious foundation. On January 29, 2020, 2 trucks owned by Paul were taken into evidence. On February 5th of that same year, search warrants for specific items of evidence were issued for 4 different locations. This included a home in Los Angeles. Paul was briefly detained while the search was carried out. By April 22, 2020, the Los Angeles Times reported that a search warrant was served at the home of Paul Flores in San Pedro, California. Items of interest were successfully retrieved during the search, including date rape drugs and videos of Paul sexually assaulting young women. Paul was then arrested on February 11, 2021, in Ranchos Palos Verdes, California, on suspicion of being a felon in possession of a firearm. In March of the same year, a search warrant was issued for the home of Paul's father, Ruben Flores. Using cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar to carry out the property search, an older model Volkswagen was towed away for evidence after a search conducted by the dogs. On April 13th, Paul and his father Ruben were taken into custody by San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Department in relation to Kristen's case. Paul was charged with murder and Ruben with being an accessory after the fact. Paul may have gotten away with a charge of sexual assault due to the statute of limitations, but murder committed during a rape or attempted rape still carries a first-degree felony murder charge. In September 2021, a judge ruled that there was sufficient evidence for the case to proceed to trial. Set to begin in April 2022, the trial was delayed and moved to Monterey County. The trial began on July 18, 2022. Paul and Ruben are being tried separately with 2 different sets of jurors, but at the same time. Opening statements made by San Luis Obispo County Deputy District Attorney Chris Pivrel painted a picture of a young life lost too soon. Pivrel described to the jurors a family mourning their daughter's unknown whereabouts and the evil that is Paul Flores. He added that evidence found at his father Ruben's house suggested both men were responsible for the death and subsequent disposal of Kristen's body. Paul's defense attorney, Robert Sanger, called that evidence into question. He said it was a tragic situation, that Kristen's body was never found, nor was any DNA evidence. He stated it is believed she is deceased, but there is no evidence of what happened to her after Paul left her at her dorm. Since July, the trial has seen accusations of predatory behavior and violence leveled against Paul Flores. Many women have come forward accusing Paul of harassment and inappropriate sexual misconduct. 2 women who were referred to as Rhonda Doe and Sarah Doe gave testimony of their encounters with Paul. Both women alleged they felt uncharacteristically drunk after meeting Paul. Large chunks of their memories were lost, and both described waking up to Paul abusing them. Their graphic testimonies brought jurors to tears, prompting Judge Jennifer O'Keefe to call for a recess. Testimony surrounding the search of Ruben Flores' home caused another juror to break down. With testimony from investigators and experts, many graphic details are being recounted. Judge O'Keefe stated that it was a long, hard trial, and sometimes things are emotional. It was not unusual for jurors to break down emotionally. Damning evidence came in the form of one Jennifer Hudson. Hudson took to the stand explaining how she encountered Paul and his friends while skateboarding. She was 17 years old at the time. Previous court papers stated that Hudson alleged Paul remarked he had buried Kristen beneath his ramp in his backyard in Wasna. This was allegedly said while they were together during a public service announcement of Kristen's disappearance. Sanger, defense attorney for Paul, questioned the relevance of her statements. He pointed out her recreational use of drugs and alcohol, questioning her reliability. He implied she was not answering truthfully according to a transcript of her tweets. Hudson acknowledged her lack of action in notifying police. She said she only came forward after the podcast was aired. She further admitted that she canceled an interview with a detective after meeting the producer of the podcast in 2019. Sanger further questioned Hudson on whether she thought Kristen Smart was buried in Susan Flores' backyard. She reportedly responded, "That made the most sense." When Sanger pursued that Hudson had affiliations with motorcycle gang members, the line of questioning was objected to by prosecutors, the judge siding with the prosecution. During a cross-examination by Pivrel, he asked Hudson to explain a previous statement in which she said she felt responsible for the misery of the Smart family. Hudson responded by stating that had she not been a coward, she would have come forward earlier. After her testimony, Hudson reportedly broke down in tears. Unexpectedly, court proceedings were halted after Hudson's testimony, no reason given by the judge. The trial is expected to continue through September 2022. For the Smart family, an emotional decades-long search for the truth is finally coming to an end, yet their heartbreak over losing their daughter never will. For other victims of Paul Flores, old wounds are being reopened. For Chris Lambert, the quest for justice has finally begun. Kristen Smart can finally rest at peace as her killer may soon be held accountable. No longer just a face on a billboard, Kristen's story is being laid bare for all to hear and for all to share in the triumph and relief of seeing her killer face his just dues. Psychological and physical traumas received at an early age can have a very unpredictable effect on adult life. Of course, far from always, they lead to the fact that a person becomes cruel and seeks to hurt others, but sometimes it is the trauma can give rise to a real monster. Criminal psychologist Adrian Raine believes that there are genetic and psychophysical mechanisms that can turn a person into a cold-blooded killer, about which he wrote in detail in his book Anatomy of Violence. History knows a lot of serial criminals who had a truly hellish childhood, and perhaps to them can be attributed our heroine today, Sheila LaBarre. This woman had an angelic appearance which she skillfully used, seducing her victims and then brutally murdered them. Despite the fact that the court was able to prove only 2 of her crimes, criminologists are sure that there were many more. And now let's look at this difficult story from the beginning and try to understand whether Sheila LaBarre was a born monster or became him as a result of the cruelty that she faced in childhood. Who is Sheila LaBarre? Sheila LaBarre was born in 1958, the 4th of July, in the small country town of Fort Payne, Alabama. She was the youngest of 3 children of her parents and was raised with her brother and sister Lynn. Her childhood was spent in a picturesque but rather secluded place, on a farm nestled among cornfields. According to the memories of Lynn's older sibling, Sheila was an active, inquisitive, and open-minded girl with a creative streak. She liked to be in the center of attention, had a good voice and cute appearance, so perhaps if her life had turned out differently, she would have become a famous actress or singer. But instead of bright posters, her name decorated the pages of criminal chronicles. The unimaginable cruelty of her father. The head of the family, Manuel Bailey, for many years suffered from alcohol addiction, although it would be more accurate to say that his addiction suffered from his entire family. He often went on binges, turning into a real beast who enjoyed abusing his wife and children. He insulted and humiliated them, beat them with anything that came to hand, could throw everyone out in the middle of the night in a downpour of frost, and locked himself in the house, not letting anyone inside. Mothers, daughters, and sons often had to spend the night in a barn or in the open air in the field. One day, when Manuel was once again in a drunken rage, he began throwing dishes and other objects at his family members. The mother tried to cover the children as best she could, but one of the flower pots thrown by her husband hit her youngest daughter, Sheila, in the head. Sheila suffered a serious concussion and a lifelong scar on her temple, which she painstakingly covered with her hair. But not even the insults and beatings were the worst thing that the sisters had to endure in their parents' home. According to the memories of Sheila and Lynn, Manuel, from an early age, forcibly inclined them to intimacy. The mother may have been aware of what was going on, but the subject was never broached. However, despite the nightmare at home, Sheila did well enough in school. She dreamed of leaving the farm as soon as possible and go to conquer the big city. The girl was quite ambitious and determined. She passionately wanted to realize her childhood dream in life and become an actress or pop singer. And she had everything for this. Charisma, bright appearance, and a beautiful voice. Adulthood. First marriage. Barely. Sheila was 18 years old. She left her parents' home, but adult life was not so joyful. To enter the university, she was not allowed to average score, and to move to the big city, she simply did not have the money. Then Sheila got a job as a maid in one of the hotels, where by that time her older sister was already working. It should be noted that Sheila had a very attractive appearance. She had big blue eyes, a charming smile, and a mop of thick long hair. She was surrounded by attention from men, and over time, she learned to use it and manipulate her suitors. In the late 70s, LaBarre, then Bailey, met a guy named Jonathan Baxter, and a romantic relationship began between them. Jonathan was not yet 20 years old at the time, but he already had a young daughter from a previous relationship. However, the child did not become a hindrance, and soon the couple got married. However, this marriage lasted only a few months, and collapsed after Jonathan learned that the young wife abused his daughter while he disappeared at work. Jonathan did not organize scandals and listen to explanations. He just filed for divorce and put his wife with his belongings outside his house. He never wanted to see or hear from her again. After the divorce, Sheila dated various men and mostly lived off them, but all these relationships were fleeting and lasted from a few weeks to a couple of months, until in the early 80s she met her future second husband, Ronnie Jennings. The tumultuous romance soon led to marriage, and Sheila took on a double last name, Bailey Jennings. It was an unhealthy relationship between two irascible and unstable people who regularly cheated on each other, scandalized, and even fought. Still, their marriage lasted more than 3 years. In 1984, after another family quarrel, Sheila demanded a divorce from her husband, but he refused her. In fact, Ronnie did not hold on to the relationship at all. He just wanted to piss off his wife and make her mad, and he succeeded. Sheila became hysterical, took a large number of drugs in front of her husband, drinking strong alcohol, and after this infernal cocktail, sat behind the wheel of the car and rushed down the road. Naturally, soon Sheila, under the influence of pills and alcohol, lost consciousness, flew off the road, and at high speed crashed into a tree. She miraculously survived, but suffered a massive head injury. She spent more than a week in a deep coma, and doctors made no prognosis. When Sheila finally regained consciousness and gradually recovered, she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital, where she spent several months. She later complained to her sister that one of the orderlies was constantly harassing her and possibly taking advantage of her helpless state when she was heavily sedated. After all this, Sheila returned to her second husband's home, but began to behave not just aggressively but threateningly toward him. When during another scandal she attacked Ronnie and poked him in the chest with nail scissors, Ronnie, fearing for his own life and health, filed for divorce and hurriedly moved out of the mad woman. Rich lover. When the second marriage was dissolved, the young woman began looking for lovers through the dating columns of the print media, and she left her ads there as well. But no man did not stay with her for long, because Sheila tended to dominate everything, rigidly suppressing their partners both in intimate and everyday life. Soon the photo of an attractive girl in the dating section drew the attention of 60-year-old Wilfred Bill LaBar. The man had previously been married twice and had adult children and grandchildren from previous marriages. He was widowed a few years ago and had been living alone on his large country ranch ever since. Bill was a fairly wealthy man. He had a chiropractic office in Epping, New Hampshire, and on the ranch he raised horses. At the same time, he was very lonely and needed a strong, powerful woman. In fact, that's exactly what he found. Sheila was attracted by the wealth of her new acquaintance, and she decided that it would be an ideal union for her. And to make Bill completely lost his head, she began to send him a postal mail, frank letters, supplementing them with her nude photos. The trap worked, and soon LaBar invited a charming pen pal to visit his ranch. Their romance developed rapidly. An elderly man is not stingy on expensive gifts for a young mistress, and in the summer of 1987, she moved to live with him. This has incredibly flattered the doctor, who now went out in public with a beautiful companion who was half his age and was fit for him as a daughter. Nevertheless, he did not plan to marry Sheila. However, Sheila, not waiting for a proposal, changed her name, calling herself LaBar. Bill was surprised by this turn of events, but he did not object. Sheila began to interfere in all the affairs of her elderly lover, starting to control his business, finances, and disposition of his property. In addition, Bill was getting older and could not satisfy the intimate needs of a young woman. Then, according to Sheila herself, he allowed her to meet other men, whom she often brought directly to their home. One of Sheila's regular lovers, closer to the mid-90s, was a Jamaican national named Wayne Ennis. He was much younger than Sheila and was initially hired as an au pair on the ranch, but soon the young man, with Bill's consent, which was probably given under pressure from Sheila, moved to live in the owner's house. In 1995, Sheila and Wayne officially legalized their relationship, and the spouse considered that from now on he would be. The couple continued their relationship online. Sherry sent photos of ultrasounds and her growing belly. "I just bulged out my belly. Jerry wanted to believe it so badly that I had no doubt he would see the pregnancy even if it wasn't there," Miller would later say. Soon, on November 5, 1999, Jerry Cassidy received an email, presumably from Bruce Miller, in which he wrote that he knew about everything and would not let the bastards be born. A concerned Jerry tried to contact Sherry. Hours later she texted him herself, informing him that she had to leave for a few days and that she would text him later. The next day, Jerry received a message from Bruce and learned that he had forced his wife to have an abortion. Attached to the letter were photos of a battered Sherry. "I remember standing in front of the mirror, trying to draw bruises on my stomach," Sherry would later recount. Jerry had reached a tipping point. His children, not one but two twins at once, had been killed by Bruce Miller. He was again devastated and full of anger. He blamed Bruce for the deaths of his 3 children and the abuse of the woman he loved. After reconnecting with Sherry the next day, November 8th, Jerry said he couldn't go on like this. He would kill her husband. The couple set about devising a plan to kill him. They worked out routes, parking spots, and even the best place and time to get to the dump. Jerry then made the long drive from his home to Michigan. That same evening, as Bruce planned to leave work, he received a call from Sherry and, following the plan, asked if he could pick up a pizza on his way home. Distracted by the conversation, Bruce did not notice a man approaching him from behind, pointing his 20-gauge shotgun at him and pulling the trigger. After committing the crime, Jerry went home and Sherry began the next part of the plan. She called Bruce's brother Chuck, said she was very worried about her husband's long absence, and asked Chuck to drive to the junkyard and see if everything was okay. When Chuck got there, he found his brother dead on the floor in a pool of blood. He had been shot in the chest with a shotgun at close range. According to eyewitnesses, when Sherry learned of Bruce's death, she began screaming and crying. The crime scene was quickly discovered, but no trace or evidence of the suspect remained. Detectives learned that Bruce carried large amounts of cash, and they initially thought his death may have been the result of a botched robbery, as the dead man's wallet was missing. John Hutchinson, a friend and employee of Bruce's who had recently borrowed $2,000 from him, came under suspicion. Police questioned Hutchinson, searched his home, and confiscated weapons. John adamantly denied involvement. The search was inconclusive, and despite the fact that Hutchinson failed a polygraph test, he was eventually released. A theory of murder, due to falsification of vehicle identification numbers, was considered. However, none of the options did not give any leads, and soon the case was closed. Meanwhile, according to Bruce's sister Judy Miller, Sherry's behavior did not fit most people's idea of a grieving spouse. 2 days after the death of her supposedly beloved husband, she was already dancing in a bar in Otisville, Michigan, and looked happy. 2 weeks later, she had a boyfriend, and it wasn't Jerry Cassidy, but a local delivery boy named Jeff Foster. The goal was accomplished. It was like Sherry had passed a level in a video game, and the former lover was no longer interesting. Jerry thought that after the murder, he would be with the woman he loved. After all, he killed for her. But that didn't happen. She began to distance herself, and a month after the murder, she moved her new boyfriend Jeff Foster into the house she used to share with her husband, and completely severed her relationship with Jerry, leaving him devastated. It was probably at this point that Cassidy realized he had murdered an innocent man in cold blood. Naturally, Sheila chose an occupation to her liking. She became an operator of intimate phone services. Since she had a truly enchanting voice, men fell for the bait and offered to meet her in person. Among such guys was Kenny County, who at the time of their acquaintance was barely 24 years old. The young man was attractive in appearance, very good-natured and open. However, he had a low IQ level, due to which he was very gullible. This was exactly the kind of guy LeBar was looking for. Kenny was very close to his mother, on whom he actually depended, but Sheila, with the help of clever manipulations, managed to break this connection and literally lure Kenny to herself. She made him an unforgettable night of love and promised that they would be like this all the time. The young man decided that he had met the woman of his dreams, about which he informed his relatives, and then moved to live in Sheila's house. But soon Sheila showed the guy her true face, having arranged for him a real torture room in one of the rooms. Each time intimacy inevitably turned into a brutal beating or something worse. Kenny's body was covered with bruises, abrasions, scratches, cuts, and burn marks, but he could not leave the house of the mistress who had completely subjugated his will. Sheila did not allow him to see and communicate with his loved ones, and his family could only guess what was happening to Kenny. The first alarm was raised by neighbors, who periodically noticed the guy and were horrified by his sickly appearance. A few days before his disappearance, a local store clerk took a picture of the young man on her cell phone camera, and later this picture was attached to the case file in court. In the photo, Kenny's condition could be described as deplorable. He was very thin, there were huge bruises under his eye and on his cheek, and his nose was probably broken. Judging by the degree of healing, all these injuries had been inflicted at different times, which suggested that the guy had been brutally beaten for a long time. The contents of his cart were also alarming. He rolled 2 large canisters of fuel to the cash register, as it later turned out, for his own cremation. The store employees were so puzzled and even frightened by the guy's appearance that they decided to report him to the police for possible domestic violence. But this time, Sheila managed to get away with it, and they could not charge her with anything. Soon, Kenny stopped contacting his family altogether, and when his worried mother arrived at Labar's house, the owner behaved aggressively and advised to leave Kenny alone. All subsequent attempts ended similarly, at which point Kenny County's family filed a missing persons report with the police, indicating that he may be being held forcibly at the country ranch, a home crematorium, and gruesome findings. When police arrived at Sheila's home, she claimed that the young man no longer lived with her, and claimed that Kenny had run away because his mother, whom he was allegedly terrified of, began visiting them frequently. As evidence, Sheila provided an audio recording in which she asks her lover if his own mother had attacked him, and he quietly gives an affirmative answer. It all seemed more than strange, and the very next day, an officer visiting Sheila secured a search warrant for the estate. Sheila had been on the police's radar many times before, and her name had been linked to another mysterious disappearance of a boyfriend. But over the years, Sheila had never been questioned, and her house and grounds had never been searched. When the police arrived, they did not find Labar at home, but they did see several fires burning near the outbuildings. The fires looked strange and were made of improvised materials, a mattress, fragments of wooden furniture, hay, etc., all doused with a flammable mixture. One of the bonfires had bones in it that clearly looked like human remains. The squad requested reinforcements in the form of forensic experts, reporting all the findings, but that turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg compared to what they discovered next. Almost all over the house were found poorly washed traces of blood. It was so much that it seemed as if there had been a real massacre. It turned out that the blood belonged to at least 3 different people. The bones smoldering in the fire belonged to the missing Kenny, and I remember hearing her scream, "No, Mommy, no, don't go." After that moment, the full implications of what I had done to Bruce, his friends, his family, Jerry, his friends, and his family hit me with full force. They will never see them again. Bruce was a great man, Sherry Miller wrote of her husband. He never hurt me or my children. All he did was love us. He wanted to adopt my children. He just wanted a family, the only man who loved me, and I ordered him killed. In 2022, Sherry gave a public interview to a popular TV station. She admitted that Bruce was not involved with the mob and never abused her. She admitted that she used makeup to fake bruises and faked ultrasound scans to manipulate Jerry. According to Sherry, she didn't do it for the money. She said that she was afraid Bruce would find out who she really was and felt that it would be easier for him to be killed than to learn the truth about her. Sherry admitted that she knew about Jerry's tendency toward depression and the brief case of evidence, but was confident that she would talk herself out of anything and could manipulate the jury and the court. She was so convinced of this that she turned down a plea bargain that could have gotten her 15 years instead of a life sentence. According to Sherry, it took a public story to find peace with herself. It's still very hard for me to look in the mirror realizing what I did. I've been waiting to tell the truth and hopefully get a sense of peace from it. Sherry Miller remains incarcerated at the Valley Women's Complex in Michigan. She is not eligible for parole. In one voice, called her a crazy, unstable, and extremely violent woman. And Wayne Annis, the third husband, said that the ex-wife repeatedly persuaded him to kill Mr. Labar in order to seize his property. But despite the defense's attempts to convince the court that Sheila was insane and in need of treatment, it was proven that she was aware of her actions at the time of her crimes. She was found guilty in July 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of ever being released. All of her appeals were rejected. Sheila is now serving her sentence in Florida at Homestead Correctional Facility. Thanks for watching, guys. That was Jack. Subscribe to the channel and don't forget to click on the bell not to miss new stories. See you soon. Take care. During the final sentencing, excitement gripped the Eckerd parents. Judge Anthony imposed a sentence of 50 years in prison without parole. The parents were broken. One miserable day had taken 2 sons from them at once. The cold-blooded murder of an innocent man, and even a brother, is clearly beyond the bounds of adequate human response. In the biblical story, the brother killer Cain was banished from paradise as punishment. But he solved the problem differently, eliminating the source of his remorse. In the summer of 2003, the body of 36-year-old Sabrina Payne was found in a field near Tremont, Illinois. Sabrina was a black female who was known to support a drug habit with prostitution. Sabrina had last been seen at her home 2 days before her body was found. The original autopsy failed to determine a cause of death, leaving some of the detectives to believe she had overdosed. One detective, however, felt uneasy about that assumption. His suspicions were confirmed as more bodies were found in Peoria and Tazewell counties over the next year. On February 5, 2004, the body of 36-year-old Barbara Williams was found in a ditch near Edwards, Illinois. She was found partially clothed and lying face down in the snow. She had been seen alive between 9 and 10 p.m. the night before. An autopsy showed that she had multiple contusions and abrasions on her body. Toxicology showed that she had fatal levels of cocaine in her blood. At this point, police were not ready to call this a murder or entertain the idea of a serial killer preying on black drug-addicted prostitutes. In October of 2004, 32-year-old Shakonda Thomas was reported missing. She had last been seen by her family in August. Shakonda was known to disappear at times, but when she didn't come back after several weeks, her family reported her missing. Shirley Entrap was also reported missing in the late summer of 2004. She was seen 3 days before she was reported missing. Tamara Walls was reported missing in September of 2004 after not being seen for 3 weeks. All 3 missing women were also black females known to support a crack cocaine habit with prostitution. 36-year-old mother of 8, Laura Lawler, disappeared from her home after leaving with a man and woman. Her longtime partner searched for her, but only was able to determine she had been with a man named Larry. Her boyfriend and father to her 7 daughters and 1 son describes Laura as the love of his life and a beautiful soul. The two had experimented with crack cocaine, and Laura seemed to struggle with addiction before her disappearance. On September 25, 2004, Linda Neal was found on King Road in Tazewell County. She was found nude along the side of the road. Linda, like the other women, was known to be part of the drug scene in Peoria. At this point, police had determined there was likely a serial killer stalking black females in the Peoria area. A task force was formed, which one detective states would have occurred much quicker if the victims had been white females. While police desperately searched for the killer, they kept a close eye on women in the community at risk. Despite their efforts, on October 15, 2004, Brenda Irving's body was found in a ditch near Farmington. Brenda was found nude, and an autopsy determined that she had been strangled and suffered blunt force trauma to her head. She also had fatal levels of cocaine in her system at the time of her death. Her children had feared for their mother's safety, as she had known many of the women who had been killed or disappeared from central Illinois. Brenda struggled with drug addiction. Despite detectives' best efforts, the case proved difficult to solve. They followed thousands of leads, but finally got the lead they were waiting for in December of 2004. 35-year-old Vicky Bomer was arrested for theft. From jail, she told authorities that she thought she could help them find the serial killer preying on her fellow sex workers. She believed that a man who had picked her up in July 2004 was responsible. Bomer explained that in July, a man named Larry Bright lured her to his mother's home, where they shared alcohol and drugs. Once she was intoxicated, she said Bright attacked her, attempted to rape her, and pulled a knife on her. Somehow, Bomer was able to escape. Police were at first skeptical, as Bomer asked for a plea deal in exchange for her testimony. Why hadn't she reported this back in July? Why wait until she was under arrest? Vicky Bomer claimed she was scared of being arrested for outstanding warrants, which is why she did not come forward in July 2004. A search of her criminal history confirmed the warrants, so detectives decided to take a look at the man named Larry Bright. Larry Dean Bright was born in Peoria, Illinois, on July 8, 1966. He served a 2-year stint in prison at age 19 for burglary and carjacking. According to Larry's family, the time Larry spent in prison changed him for the worse. Larry became more angry and violent, and began using drugs. Larry had an injury, which started an addiction to prescription opioids and later crack cocaine. He also developed an addiction to pornography, preferring videos with black women. Larry lived with his mother in a tiny guest house behind her home. Larry enjoyed gardening, creating a beautiful garden bed of flowers for his mother. When the police arrived at Larry's home following the tip, they noticed the beautiful flowers and Larry was placed under arrest for the unlawful restraint of Vicky. They questioned Larry about the murders, but he denied having any information about the murdered and missing women. Throughout the interview, Larry smoked several cigarettes. Detectives planned to take one of the cigarette butts and test it for DNA, but Larry ate them before leaving the interrogation room. Larry declined to give DNA voluntarily. Police searched Larry Bright's home on January 20th, 2005. The investigators dug up the garden, finding several small bone fragments and ashes that were later determined to be human. When the police questioned Larry again, they told him they were digging up his mother's flowers. At this point, Larry broke down and confessed to multiple murders. He even led investigators to the remains of some of his victims. Larry explained that around July 27, 2003, he picked up Sabrina Payne on the south side of Peoria. He drove her to his home, which he shared with his mother. He cleaned the two drink and used cocaine before having consensual sex. Larry said he did not intend to tell Sabrina, but he became enraged, thinking Sabrina was trying to rip him off. He strangled her to death and dumped her body near the cornfield where she was found. Larry confessed to picking up Barbara Williams in February 2004. Again, he used drugs and alcohol with his victim. He stated that he once again lost control of his anger and killed Barbara. He claimed he caught Barbara stealing from him. He dumped her body along the road where she was found the next day. The prosecution believed that after the first two murders, Larry developed a bloodlust. At the time of his arrest, he said, "I knew them, I would tell the others I would pick up. I went out hunting." Larry also confessed to killing Laura Lauer. He burned her body in his backyard burn pit, burying the remains in his mother's yard. He said he wanted to destroy the bodies to avoid getting caught. He confessed to and burning her remains. Her job almost found in the backyard. He admitted to strangling, beating, and burning Shirley in trap. Shakanda Thomas had the same fate after being picked up by Larry Bright. He burned the woman and buried the ashes in the yard. Because of his attempts to crony his victims, he was nicknamed the Bone Crusher. Larry said that he attempted to burn Linda Neal and Brenna Irving as well, but the attempts were unsuccessful due to the weather. He dunked both women along the side of the road. Larry was facing the death penalty following his January 2005 arrest. In an attempt to spare his mother the embarrassment of a trial and avoid the death penalty, Larry Bright pleaded guilty to 7 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of drug-induced homicide on May 30, 2006. Bright's murders were not considered racially motivated, but detectives believe he was just attracted to black women. He is one of the few serial killers who chooses victims outside of his race. Larry was sentenced to 7 life sentences without the possibility of parole to be served concurrently. He was also given an additional 30 years for the drug-induced homicide. As part of the plea deal, Larry will be required to serve 100% of his sentence with no parole consideration. Larry is currently housed at the Shawnee Correctional Center in Vienna, Illinois. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars, but that brings little peace to the families of his victims. The loved ones of Larry's victims want people to know that the women he killed were more than just drug addicts or prostitutes. They were people. They were mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends. The serial killer dentist of St. Louis, Glennon Engelman. Dr. Glennon Engelman was born on February 6, 1927 in St. Louis, Missouri. Dr. Engelman grew up on the south side of the city and felt a deep connection to his neighborhood. After serving in the military, Dr. Engelman used his GI Bill to go to Washington University and become a dentist. He opened his dental office on the south side of St. Louis, serving the community he had always loved. Dr. Engelman, who went by Glenn, was married to her in 1956. By 1958, both Glenn and Ruth had remarried. Glenn was operating his dental office and appeared to be successfully serving the St. Louis community. On December 17, 1958, citizens in Forest Park noticed a bloody man stumbling. The man, James Stanley Bullock, soon passed from his injuries. These injuries were caused by a gunshot. No one could figure out why someone would shoot 28-year-old James Bullock. James Bullock was born on April 17, 1931 in DeSoto. He was raised in Shiloh, Illinois by his grandparents and later his aunt after his parents passed away. According to an article from 1938, the then 7-year-old was living with his grandparents in 1938 and enjoyed attending school and fishing. James later served in the military before returning to St. Louis to work and go to college. Back in St. Louis, James met Edna Ruth, the ex-wife of Dr. Glenn Engelman. The two married, and 6 short months later, James was dead. An employee at a local sanitarium initially claimed James was there 4 days before his murder, asking to be admitted because he feared for his life. His wife and aunt said this was not true, as the three had dinner together on that night. According to his widow and aunt, James was not afraid for his life, and they knew no one who would want him dead. However, Edna Ruth benefited greatly from her husband's death. Ruth had life insurance policies totaling $64,088. While under questioning, Edna Ruth made several weird statements, including telling the police she was married before, but her husband did not know. Who was she married to? Her husband's dentist, Dr. Glenn Engelman. Edna Ruth had lied to James and his family, and lied on the marriage application about being married before. Police questioned a local career criminal who was out on parole for an assault at the time of the shooting. They weren't able to tie him to the murder of James, but they did note he lived near Dr. Engelman's office. Dr. Engelman and Edna Ruth both refused to take a polygraph test and denied any involvement in the murder of James Bullock. Dr. Engelman's new wife, Ida, refused to be questioned by the police. A patient provided an alibi for Dr. Engelman. However, another witness said that they tried to find someone at the office around the time, and the office was empty. Edna Ruth invested part of the funds she received after becoming a widow and a doctor. Been bored being a dentist, so he often ventured into other areas of business. This included buying a trike strip along with a partner, Eric Fry. Dr. Engelman had grown to be close friends with Eric and his wife, Sandy. On September 26, 1963, Eric and Dr. Engelman were at the trike strip using dynamite to explode, and then fell abandoned cisterns on the property. Eric was lying on his stomach near one of the cisterns when the dynamite exploded quicker than anticipated. Eric was killed instantly and found lying in the bottom of the cistern. Coroner H.D. Steinbeck ruled the death accidental. Mr. Fry's wife had an insurance policy on her husband, which she invested part of into Dr. Engelman's practice. Dr. Engelman divorced Ida and married his third wife, Ruth, in 1967. The couple shared a son, but Ruth heeded a close relationship her husband had with a young woman who worked in his office named Carmen Miranda. Dr. Engelman offered to train Carmen to be a dental assistant in his office. Edna felt uncomfortable with the flirting between the doctor and his young assistant. Dr. Engelman, however, claimed he was trying to help people in his community. He hired Carmen's brother, Nick, as well at one point. Ruth was relieved when Carmen met a married man named Peter Holm. Just a few months later, however, Carmen and Eric were walking in a rural area in Pacific, Missouri. The couple were exploring an area known to have caves and scenic paths. A shot suddenly fired, hitting Peter in the head. Peter died instantly, and hysterically Carmen flied down to help. Nearby, police found an X on a tree made with tape. The area was familiar to locals as a hunting area, and police believed that the shot was accidental. Police believed someone was target shooting at the X and accidentally struck Mr. Holm. Carmen had a significant amount of life insurance on her husband, totaling $60,000. This is equivalent to around $300,000 in 2024. Dr. Engelman and Ruth divorced soon after, at which time Dr. Engelman married young Carmen, whom he had known since she was a small child. His son lived with Edna, his ex-wife. Despite being married to Carmen, Dr. Engelman and Ruth still met regularly for sex. Dr. Engelman constantly had extramarital affairs, which included previous affairs with Carmen, Ruth, and even Sandy Fry, the wife of his business associate Eric Fry, who was killed by dynamite. Another of Dr. Engelman's affairs was with a patient named Barbara Boyle. On November 3, 1977, someone pretending to be from the farm girl walked up to the farmhouse owned by Arthur and Vernita Goosewell in Everettsville, Illinois. Soon after entering the home, the elderly couple were attacked and both were shot in the head. The wealthy couple left $340,000 to their son, Ronald Goosewell. Guess who Ronald Goosewell was married to? Barbara Boyle. On April 4, 1979, less than 2 years after the murder of his parents, Ronald Goosewell was found dead inside his car outside a hotel in East St. Louis, Illinois. The man had been beaten and shot to death. He had been missing for 4 days when his body was found. Following her husband's murder, Barbara collected his inheritance in addition to several life insurance policies. The equivalent sum of money today would be nearly $1.7 million. Guess who she cut to? Dr. Glennon Engelman. Following the murder of Ronald Goosewell, authorities were starting to notice the trend of connected deaths to Dr. Engelman. His patients and community, however, only saw a generous man committed to helping his community and its citizens. Dr. Engelman was not the greatest dentist, however. He often did a sloppy job of making casts for dentures and dental appliances, requiring the work to have to be redone by the dental lab several times. His business was struggling, however, and he soon found himself in debt with the dental lab owned by Sophie Barrera. Sophie Barrera owned the South St. Louis Dental Laboratory and had grown tired of waiting for Dr. Engelman to pay up by 1980. She filed a lawsuit against the doctor that was set to go to court just a few days after Sophie was murdered. On January 14, 1980, Sophie entered her vehicle in South St. Louis. Shortly after, the vehicle exploded. Police found remnants of a bomb under her charred vehicle. Sophie had told her son before she was in fear of being killed. She believed Dr. Glenn Engelman was dangerous. Dr. Engelman was questioned for 3 hours and then released. Police were certain he was responsible for Sophie's death, but they had to prove it. The public also wondered if the bombing was related to another bombing in the area that was carrying out between two mob families fighting for control over St. Louis labor unions. The evidence indicated, however, that this was not a mob hit. The number one suspect was the man who owed Sophie $15,000. Dr. Engelman had to be stopped, but the police weren't sure how to do it. Detectives soon began having conversations with Dr. Engelman's ex-wife and mother of his son, Ruth. Ruth told police nothing at first, but eventually started to talk. She explained that Dr. Engelman often bragged about killing people. He told her that he had a superpower. He was able to kill without remorse. He had admitted to killing Eric Fry, Peter Home, and the Couswell family. It was his side hustle, killing for profit. Ruth agreed to help the police, but none of her testimony could be used in court because Dr. Engelman confessed to her while the two were still married. He was protected by spousal privilege. Ruth decided to wear a wire, however, and met up with Dr. Engelman to exchange their son, and sometimes just to socialize. They were still having a sexual relationship despite Dr. Engelman's marriage to Carmen. She tried to get Dr. Engelman to confess to her again by asking direct questions. He didn't seem to take the bait at first, and Ruth feared he would kill her next. Ruth suggested police plan a bug in her bedroom, and she would invite the dentist over for sex. Dr. Engelman was suspicious, however, and did not say anything that could lead to his arrest. Ruth then met him at a diner wearing a wire, and this time he commented on being homicidally intimate with the widow of one of his victims. He admitted to the murders in great detail, providing just what police needed for an arrest. He explained that he found murder more sexually satisfying than sex. His ex-wife was given a new life in the witness protection program. Carmen, who was no longer married to the dentist, and her brother Nick were brought for questioning to corroborate the allegations against Dr. Engelman. As possible co-conspirators, they asked for a more granted immunity to testify against the dentist. Carmen told quite the story. She said she was working for the dentist when he suggested she find someone with good benefits to marry. He told her about Eric Fry, whom he said he directed Sandy Fry to marry with all intentions of murdering the insurance proceeds. Soon after she was married, Carmen said Dr. Engelman told her where to go and made sure her husband was shot and killed. He staged it to look like a target shooting accident. Glennon Engelman was finally arrested and charged with murder in 1980. Carmen testified at Dr. Engelman's first trial, for which he was convicted of murdering Peter Hom and given 50 years in prison. The dentist then pled guilty to the murder of Sophie Barrera to avoid the death penalty. Serving a list sentence for that murder in Missouri, Dr. Engelman was back in court by 1985 in Illinois. In 1984, Robert Handy, a conduct and acquaintance of Dr. Engelman, admitted to authorities that he had taken part in the murder conspiracy of the Couswell family. He implicated Dr. Engelman, who had bludgeoned Harmold Couswell and shot him, as well as Ronald's widow, Barbara Boyle. Dr. Engelman was given 3 life sentences for the Couswell murders. He also was convicted of federal mail fraud and given a 30-year federal sentence. He is believed to have killed at least 12 people, including conspiring with his first wife to kill her husband, James Bullock, in 1958. Edna Ruth was never charged in the case due to lack of evidence. Barbara Boyle went on trial for the murder of her in-laws, Arthur and Vernita Couswell, and husband Ronald in 1985. The jury acquitted her of the murders of Arthur and Vernita by convicting her of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Ronald Couswell. Barbara Boyle was sentenced to 50 years in prison in 1985. She was granted parole in 2009. Dr. Engelman enjoyed his notoriety in the jury, often comparing himself to legendary outlaw Jesse James. He is believed to have killed at least 12 people, but the actual number is unknown. Unlike other serial killers, Dr. Engelman was inspired, at least in part, by greed. He also seemed to revel in his ability to not feel remorse. Dr. Engelman died of diabetes-related health issues in 1999 at age 72. He was incarcerated in Jefferson City at the time,